the Suebi emerged from the mists of prehistory along the banks of the Elbe River, their origins deeply rooted in the archaeological layers of the Late Bronze Age and early Iron Age periods between 1000 and 500 BCE. Excavations throughout the Elbe basin have revealed a distinctive material culture that marks the earliest recognisable Suebi settlements, characterised by specific pottery styles, metalworking techniques, and burial practices that would later define this formidable Germanic confederation. Archaeological evidence from sites such as those near modern-day Hamburg and along the Middle Elbe reveals a gradual cultural transformation during this period. The transition from Bronze Age Urnfield culture to early Iron Age Hallstatt influences created a unique synthesis in the Elbe region. Excavated settlements show rectangular longhouses constructed with wooden posts and wattle and daub walls, typically measuring 15 to 25 metres in length and housing extended family groups. These structures featured distinct hearth arrangements and storage areas that differed markedly from contemporary Celtic and Proto-Germanic dwellings found elsewhere in Central Europe. The pottery assemblages from these early Suebi sites display characteristic decorative motifs, including geometric patterns, incised lines, and distinctive rim treatments that remained consistent across multiple generations. Carbon dating of organic materials from these contexts places the earliest definitively Suebi cultural markers around 900 BCE, though the cultural continuum suggests gradual development rather than sudden appearance. Bronze and early iron artifacts recovered from burial contexts include distinctive fibulae, weapons, and personal ornaments that show both local innovation and selective adoption of techniques from neighbouring cultures. Linguistic analysis supports the archaeological evidence for Suebi origins in the Elbe region. The reconstructed Proto-Germanic language spoken by early Suebi tribes shows specific phonological developments that distinguish it from other Germanic dialects of the period. Place names preserved in later Roman sources retain linguistic elements that can be traced to early Germanic roots specific to the Elbe basin. The ethnonym Suebi itself derives from the Proto-Germanic root meaning one's own people or free people, indicating a strong sense of ethnic identity that developed during this formative period. The development of distinctive Suebi cultural practices became increasingly pronounced during the early Iron Age, with the most recognisable being the characteristic hair knot known to Romans as the Suebian. This distinctive hairstyle involved gathering the hair on the right side of the head and binding it into a tight knot, often secured with bone or metal pins. Archaeological evidence for this practice comes from preserved hair samples in bog burials and artistic representations on metalwork. The hair knot served multiple functions beyond mere ornamentation. It identified tribal affiliation, indicated warrior status, and demonstrated adherence to Suebi cultural norms. Roman sources, particularly Tacitus in his Germania, provide detailed descriptions of Suebi appearance and customs that complement archaeological findings. According to these accounts, free Suebi men wore their distinctive hair knot throughout their lives, while slaves and prisoners were forbidden from adopting this style. The practice extended beyond simple hair arrangement to include specific grooming rituals and the use of various oils and dyes to maintain the knot's appearance. Young warriors often competed to achieve the most impressive and elaborate hair arrangements, with the most skilled receiving recognition and higher status within their warbands. Warrior traditions formed another cornerstone of early Suebi identity, developing sophisticated martial practices that would later prove formidable against Roman legions. Archaeological evidence from weapon burials reveals the evolution of Suebi military technology from Bronze Age spears and axes to sophisticated iron swords, shields, and specialized cavalry equipment. The typical Suebi warrior of the early Iron Age carried a long iron sword with a distinctive pommel design, a wooden shield reinforced with iron boss and rim, and multiple spears of varying lengths for different combat situations. Training for warfare began in childhood, with boys as young as 7 years old participating in mock combat exercises using wooden weapons. Adult warriors organised themselves into age-graded societies that provided both military training and social structure. The most elite warriors, known as the comitatus, formed personal retinues around successful war leaders, creating bonds of loyalty that transcended tribal boundaries. These warrior bands engaged in regular cattle raiding, territorial disputes, and seasonal campaigns that maintained their fighting skills and provided opportunities for young men to prove their valour. The Suebi confederation structure emerged gradually from these warrior traditions and tribal customs, creating a complex political organisation that allowed for both unity and local autonomy. Rather than a centralised kingdom, the Suebi developed a loose confederation of related tribes that shared cultural practices, religious beliefs, and military obligations, while maintaining distinct territorial boundaries and leadership structures. This system proved remarkably adaptable, allowing rapid mobilization for large-scale conflicts while preserving local customs and governance. The major Suebi sub-tribes each developed specialized roles within the broader confederation. The Marcomanni, whose name translates to bordermen, established themselves as the primary military force along the confederation's frontiers. Archaeological evidence from Marcomannic territories shows extensive fortifications, weapon caches, and evidence of professional warrior classes supported by agricultural surpluses. Their settlements featured defensive earthworks, palisades, and strategically positioned watchtowers that could coordinate responses to external threats. The Quadi occupied the eastern portions of Suebi territory, developing expertise in horse breeding and cavalry warfare that made them invaluable allies in military campaigns. Excavations in Quadi territories have revealed extensive horse burial sites, specialized equestrian equipment, and evidence of trade networks extending far into the Pontic steppes. Their warriors fought primarily as heavy cavalry, using long lances, curved swords, and composite bows that combined Germanic craftsmanship with techniques learned from steppe nomads. The Hermundari controlled crucial trade routes and river crossings, developing commercial expertise that provided economic foundation for the broader confederation. Their settlements show evidence of specialized craft production, including metalworking, pottery manufacture, and textile production that supplied both local needs and export trade. Hermundari merchants established trading posts throughout central Germania, creating networks that facilitated both commercial exchange and political communication between distant Suebi communities. Territorial expansion patterns during the pre-Roman period reveal the systematic nature of Suebi growth and consolidation. Beginning from their Elbe River heartland, Suebi tribes gradually extended their influence southward and eastward through a combination of military conquest, political alliance, and demographic pressure. This expansion followed river valleys and natural corridors, with new settlements established at strategic locations that could control trade routes and provide defensive advantages. The process of expansion involved careful reconnaissance, negotiation with existing populations, and gradual integration of conquered territories into the Suebi Confederation structure. Rather than simple conquest and displacement, the Suebi often incorporated local elites into their political system, adopted useful technologies and practices from subject peoples, and established garrison settlements that maintained control while allowing cultural continuity. Archaeological evidence shows that Suebi expansion created a distinctive settlement pattern across central Germania. Major population centres developed at river confluences and natural crossroads, surrounded by networks of smaller agricultural settlements and defensive outposts. These centres featured large assembly halls, craft workshops, storage facilities, and religious sites that served both local populations and regional administrative functions. The establishment of Suebi dominance in central Germania required sophisticated military organisation and political coordination. War leaders coordinated campaigns across multiple tribal territories, managing logistics, intelligence gathering, and diplomatic relations with both allies and enemies. The Confederation's military success depended on their ability to rapidly concentrate forces from scattered territories while maintaining defensive capabilities across their expanding frontiers. Religious practices and beliefs provided additional cohesion for the expanding Suebi Confederation. Archaeological evidence reveals shared ritual sites, common burial practices, and standardized religious artifacts that maintained cultural unity across dispersed populations. Sacred groves, hilltop sanctuaries, and seasonal gathering places served as focal points for Confederation-wide religious observances that reinforced political and military alliances. The pre-Roman period saw the Suebi Confederation reach its greatest territorial extent, controlling vast areas of central Germania, from the Elbe to the Danube and from the Rhine to the Oder. This dominance rested on their military prowess, political organisation, and economic networks that made them the most powerful Germanic force north of the Alps. Their influence extended far beyond their direct territorial control, with client tribes, trading partners, and military allies creating a sphere of influence that encompassed much of Central and Northern Europe. By the middle of the 1st century BCE, the expanding Roman Republic had pushed its influence deep into Gaul, bringing it into inevitable contact with the formidable Suebi Confederation that dominated the territories beyond the Rhine. This collision between two of antiquity's most powerful military forces would reshape the political landscape of Central Europe and provide history with some of its most detailed accounts of Germanic society through the meticulous observations of Gaius Julius Caesar. Caesar's asterisk, Commentarie de Bello Gallico asterisk, written between 58 and 50 BCE, represents our most comprehensive contemporary source for understanding the Suebi during this crucial period. His account, though filtered through Roman political objectives and cultural biases, provides unprecedented detail about Suebi military organisation, social structure, and territorial extent. Caesar encountered the Suebi at the height of their power, when their confederation controlled vast territories stretching from the Elbe to the Danube and commanded the loyalty of over 100 distinct tribal groups. The Roman general's description of the Suebi reveals both admiration and concern for their military capabilities. He characterized them as by far the most warlike of all the Germans, and noted that they maintained a standing army of 100,000 warriors, with an equal number held in reserve for territorial defence. This military organisation impressed even experienced Roman commanders, who recognised in the Suebi a level of coordination and discipline rarely seen among Germanic peoples. Caesar observed that the Suebi divided their population into two groups annually, one half dedicated to warfare and raiding, while the other remained home to manage agricultural production and territorial defence. The catalyst for direct Roman-Suebi confrontation emerged from the complex political situation in eastern Gaul, where the Sequani tribe had invited Germanic intervention in their ongoing conflict with the Aedui. Around 72 BCE, the Sequani leadership, desperate to break Aedui dominance in the region, had extended an invitation to Ariovistes, king of the Germanic Harudes tribe and a prominent leader within the Suebi Confederation. This decision would prove catastrophic for Gallic independence and provide Rome with a pretext for deeper involvement in Germanic affairs. Ariovistus arrived in Gaul with approximately 15,000 Germanic warriors, primarily drawn from Harudes, Marcomanni, Triboci, Vangiones, Nemetes, Seiducia, and Suevi tribes. His initial success against the Aedui encouraged additional Germanic migration, and within a decade Ariovistus commanded over 120,000 Germanic settlers who had established permanent settlements in Sequani territory. The Germanic king demonstrated remarkable political acumen, negotiating recognition from the Roman Senate around 59 BCE, which granted him the prestigious title of friend and ally of the Roman people. However, Ariovistus's growing power and territorial ambitions soon alarmed both his Gallic hosts and Roman observers. The Germanic king demanded additional territory from the Sequani, claiming he needed land for 24,000 more Harudes warriors who were preparing to cross the Rhine. His forces had already occupied approximately one-third of Sequani territory, the most fertile agricultural lands in the region, and his demands for additional concessions threatened to reduce the Sequani to vassalage in their own homeland. The situation deteriorated rapidly when Ariovistus began asserting authority over other Gallic tribes, including the Aedui, who had traditionally maintained friendly relations with Rome. His warriors conducted raids throughout eastern Gaul, seizing cattle, grain stores and captives while establishing fortified settlements that served as bases for further expansion. The Germanic king's forces employed tactics that combined traditional Germanic warfare with innovations learned from Gallic opponents, including improved siege techniques and coordinated cavalry operations. Roman concern intensified when Ariovistus began recruiting additional warriors from across the Rhine, drawing upon the vast manpower reserves of the Suebi Confederation. Intelligence reports reaching Roman commanders described massive Germanic gatherings along the Rhine's eastern banks, with tribal contingents arriving from territories as distant as the Elbe river basin. These reinforcements brought the total Germanic force in Gaul to potentially 200,000 warriors and settlers, creating a demographic shift that threatened to permanently alter the region's ethnic composition. Caesar's decision to intervene against Ariovistus in 58 BCE reflected both immediate strategic concerns and longer-term Roman objectives in Gaul. The Germanic king's growing power threatened Roman allies, disrupted established trade networks, and created a precedent for large-scale Germanic migration that could destabilize Roman frontier regions. Additionally, Ariovistus's success encouraged other Germanic leaders to consider similar ventures, potentially creating multiple Germanic kingdoms within striking distance of Roman territory. The Roman commander's initial diplomatic overtures to Ariovistus revealed the Germanic king's confidence and political sophistication. When Caesar requested a meeting to discuss territorial boundaries and the treatment of Roman allies, Ariovistus responded with a carefully crafted message that demonstrated his understanding of Roman political language, while asserting Germanic rights to conquered territory. The king argued that his presence in Gaul resulted from legitimate invitation by the Sequani, that his victories had been won through superior courage and military skill, and that Rome had no legitimate authority over territories beyond the Roman province. Ariovistus's diplomatic communications revealed the extent of his political intelligence network and his understanding of Roman internal politics. He accurately identified Caesar's political vulnerabilities, questioned the legality of Roman intervention, and threatened to mobilize the full military resources of the Suebi Confederation if Rome persisted in opposing Germanic expansion. The king's messages referenced specific Roman precedents, cited treaty obligations, and demonstrated familiarity with Roman legal concepts that impressed even Caesar's experienced diplomatic staff. The breakdown of negotiations occurred when Ariovistus demanded that Caesar withdraw from Gallic territory and recognize Germanic sovereignty over all lands east of the Saone River. This demand would have effectively created a Germanic kingdom controlling the crucial trade routes between the Mediterranean and northern Europe, while positioning Germanic forces within striking distance of the Roman province. Caesar's refusal to accept these terms made military confrontation inevitable. The Roman general's ethnographic observations of the Suebi provide invaluable insights into their social organization and military culture during this period. Caesar noted that the Suebi practiced a form of collective land ownership, with tribal authorities redistributing agricultural plots annually to prevent the accumulation of private wealth and maintain social equality among free warriors. This system ensured that all adult males remained available for military service while preventing the emergence of a landed aristocracy that might challenge traditional warrior values. Suebi military organization impressed Roman observers with its sophistication and effectiveness. Caesar described a complex hierarchy of war leaders, with local commanders responsible for training and equipping warriors from their immediate territories, regional leaders coordinating multi-tribal operations, and supreme commanders like Ariovistus directing confederation-wide military campaigns. This system allowed rapid mobilization of large forces while maintaining tactical flexibility and local initiative. The Suebi warrior culture emphasized individual courage combined with disciplined collective action. Caesar observed that young Suebi men competed fiercely for recognition in battle, with successful warriors earning the right to wear distinctive ornaments, claim larger shares of plunder, and eventually assume leadership roles within their war bands. However, this individual competition operated within strict parameters that prioritized unit cohesion and tactical effectiveness over personal glory. Suebi military equipment reflected both Germanic traditions and innovations adopted from contact with Celtic and Mediterranean cultures. Warriors carried large wooden shields reinforced with iron bosses and decorated with tribal symbols, long iron swords designed for both cutting and thrusting, and multiple spears of varying lengths for different combat situations. Cavalry forces, drawn primarily from the eastern Suebi tribes, employed longer lances, curved sabres, and composite bows that demonstrated steppe influences in their design and construction. The territorial claims of the Suebi Confederation, as described by Caesar, encompassed vast regions of central Germania that dwarfed contemporary Roman provinces in both size and population. The Confederation controlled territories extending from the North Sea coast to the Carpathian Mountains, with tribal groups occupying distinct regions while acknowledging overall Suebi hegemony. This territorial extent provided enormous manpower reserves, diverse economic resources, and strategic depth that made the Suebi Confederation the dominant power in Central Europe. Caesar's accounts describe sophisticated Suebi intelligence networks that provided detailed information about Roman military movements, political developments, and strategic intentions. Germanic scouts operated throughout Gaul, gathering information from merchants, tribal contacts, and direct observation of Roman activities. This intelligence capability allowed Suebi leaders to coordinate their responses to Roman initiatives and maintain communication across their vast territorial holdings. The economic foundations of Suebi power, as observed by Caesar, rested on a combination of agricultural production, pastoral activities, and extensive trade networks that connected the North Sea with the Danube River basin. Suebi territories produced grain surpluses that supported large warrior populations, while their herds of cattle, horses and sheep provided both sustenance and trade goods. Germanic merchants maintained commercial relationships throughout Central Europe, exchanging amber, furs and metalwork for Mediterranean luxuries and raw materials. Religious practices among the Suebi, according to Caesar's observations, centered on warrior deities and natural forces that reflected their military culture and territorial connections. Sacred groves served as meeting places for tribal assemblies and religious ceremonies, while seasonal festivals reinforced confederation unity and renewed military obligations. These religious practices provided ideological justification for Suebi expansion and resistance to foreign domination. The strategic implications of Roman-Suebi relations extended far beyond the immediate conflict in Gaul. Caesar recognized that the Suebi Confederation represented the most formidable Germanic power that Rome would likely encounter, with military capabilities and territorial resources that could challenge Roman expansion into Central Europe. The outcome of the confrontation with Ariovistus would establish precedents for future Roman-Germanic relations and determine whether Rome could successfully project power beyond the Rhine River. The defeat of Ariovistus at Vosges in 58 BCE marked a crucial turning point that triggered massive demographic upheavals across Germanic territories, fundamentally reshaping the political landscape of Central Europe for generations to come. The collapse of Germanic power in Gaul sent shockwaves throughout the Suebi Confederation, prompting large-scale population movements as tribal leaders reassessed their strategic positions and sought new territories beyond Roman reach. These migrations, occurring primarily during the 1st century BCE, represented one of the most significant demographic transformations in European prehistory, involving hundreds of thousands of people and permanently altering the ethnic composition of vast regions, from Bohemia to the Carpathian Basin. The most consequential of these population movements involved the Marcomanni tribe under the leadership of Maroboduus, a Germanic king whose political acumen and military capabilities rivaled those of his Roman contemporaries. Archaeological evidence from sites along the main river valley indicates that Marcomannic communities had maintained settlements in this region for several generations before their dramatic relocation. Excavations at Staffelberg and other fortified hilltop sites reveal extensive defensive preparations dating to the late 2nd century BCE, suggesting that Marcomannic leaders had long anticipated the need for territorial reorganization in response to Roman expansion. Maroboduus himself possessed an unusual background for a Germanic leader, having spent his youth as a hostage in Rome where he received education in Roman military tactics, political organization, and diplomatic protocols. This experience provided him with intimate knowledge of Roman strengths and weaknesses, enabling him to develop strategies that effectively countered traditional Roman advantages while exploiting Germanic military capabilities. Upon his return to Germanic territory around 9 BCE, Maroboduus found his people facing increasing pressure from Roman expansion along the Rhine frontier and growing competition for resources with neighbouring Germanic tribes. The king's decision to relocate the entire Marcomannic population to Bohemia represented a masterpiece of strategic planning that required years of preparation and coordination. Intelligence networks established throughout Central Europe identified Bohemia as an ideal location for Germanic settlement, offering fertile agricultural lands, defensible mountain barriers, and strategic position controlling major trade routes between the Danube and Elbe river systems. The region's existing Celtic population, primarily composed of Boii tribal groups, had been weakened by internal conflicts and pressure from expanding Germanic peoples, creating opportunities for determined invaders. Marcomannic migration into Bohemia began around 9 BCE with advanced parties of warriors and scouts who established fortified bases at key strategic locations throughout the region. These initial settlements, identified through archaeological excavations at sites near modern Prague and Stradonice, show evidence of rapid construction using Germanic building techniques adapted to local materials and terrain. The fortifications featured distinctive timber and earth ramparts, deep defensive ditches, and wooden palisades that could be quickly erected using readily available forest resources. The main Marcomannic migration followed established river routes, with tribal groups travelling along the Main and Danube valleys in organised columns that included warriors, families, livestock, and essential supplies. Archaeological evidence from temporary campsites along these routes reveals the sophisticated logistics required for such massive population movement. Storage pits, temporary shelters and refuse deposits indicate that the migration proceeded in stages, with extended stops at predetermined locations where advance parties had prepared supplies and established defensive positions. The displacement of Celtic populations from Bohemia occurred through a combination of military conquest, political negotiation, and demographic pressure that gradually transformed the region's ethnic composition. The Boii, who had dominated Bohemian territories for centuries, found themselves unable to resist coordinated Germanic pressure while simultaneously dealing with Roman expansion along their southern borders. Archaeological evidence from major Celtic oppida such as Zavist and Trisov shows signs of violent destruction followed by Germanic occupation, indicating that military conquest played a significant role in the territorial transfer. However, The process was not entirely destructive, as Maroboduus demonstrated considerable political skill in incorporating useful elements of Celtic society into his emerging kingdom. Celtic craftsmen, particularly metalworkers and artisans skilled in advanced techniques, were often retained and integrated into Germanic communities where their expertise contributed to economic development. Celtic agricultural practices, including advanced crop rotation methods and livestock management techniques, were adopted by Germanic settlers who recognized their effectiveness in Bohemian environmental conditions. The establishment of the Marcomannic kingdom in Bohemia created a new political entity that fundamentally altered the balance of power in Central Europe. Maroboduus organized his kingdom along lines that combined traditional Germanic tribal structures with innovations borrowed from both Roman and Celtic models. The king maintained direct control over military affairs and foreign relations, while delegating administrative responsibilities to trusted subordinates who governed distinct territorial regions. This system allowed for efficient coordination of resources, while preserving local autonomy that satisfied traditional Germanic expectations. The capital of the Marcomannic kingdom, likely located near modern Prague, developed into a major urban centre that rivaled contemporary Roman cities in size and sophistication. Archaeological excavations reveal extensive craft workshops, storage facilities, administrative buildings, and residential areas that house populations numbering in the tens of thousands. The city featured planned street layouts, centralised water management systems, and specialised districts for different economic activities that demonstrated advanced urban planning capabilities. Marcomannic military organisation reflected Maroboduus's Roman education while incorporating Germanic warrior traditions and tactical innovations. The king established a professional army of approximately 70,000 infantry and 4,000 cavalry, supported by extensive logistics networks and training facilities throughout his kingdom. These forces received standardized equipment, regular training, and systematic indoctrination that created military capabilities superior to traditional Germanic warbands, while maintaining the individual courage and tactical flexibility that characterized Germanic warfare. The kingdom's strategic position in Bohemia provided enormous advantages for both defensive and offensive operations. The surrounding mountain ranges created natural barriers that channeled potential invaders through easily defended passes, while the region's river systems provided transportation networks that facilitated rapid movement of troops and supplies. Control over these routes also generated substantial revenue through trade taxation and tribute collection from merchants travelling between northern and southern European markets. The Marcomannic kingdom's role as a buffer state between Rome and other Germanic tribes emerged gradually as Maroboduus navigated the complex diplomatic challenges of his strategic position. Roman leaders recognized that the kingdom's military capabilities and territorial extent made direct conquest extremely costly, while its geographic location made it a valuable ally for controlling other Germanic peoples. Maroboduus exploited this situation by maintaining carefully balanced relationships with both Roman authorities and Germanic tribal leaders, extracting concessions from each side while avoiding commitments that might provoke decisive action. Diplomatic correspondence preserved in Roman sources reveals the sophisticated nature of Marcomannic foreign policy during this period. Maroboduus maintained permanent embassies at Rome, exchanged hostages with Roman authorities, and participated in complex negotiations regarding territorial boundaries and trade agreements. Simultaneously, he cultivated relationships with other Germanic leaders, offering military assistance, political asylum, and economic opportunities that expanded his influence throughout Central Europe. The transformation of Central European demographics accelerated as the success of the Marcomannic kingdom encouraged additional Germanic migrations into formerly Celtic territories. The Quadi tribe, closely related to the Marcomanni, established settlements in modern Slovakia and eastern Austria, displacing local Celtic populations and creating a continuous Germanic presence along the Middle Danube frontier. Archaeological evidence from Quadi settlements shows rapid adoption of Marcomannic political and military innovations, suggesting close coordination between these related peoples. The Hermunduri, another major Suebi tribe, secured territories along the upper Main and Saale rivers, establishing control over crucial trade routes connecting the Rhine and Elbe river systems. Their settlements featured extensive fortifications, craft workshops and storage facilities that supported both military operations and commercial activities. Hermunduri leaders maintained diplomatic relations with both the Marcomannic kingdom and Roman authorities, often serving as intermediaries in negotiations between these major powers. The displacement of Celtic populations created massive refugee movements that destabilized regions far from the original areas of Germanic expansion. Celtic groups fleeing Germanic pressure migrated westward into Gaul, southward towards Roman territories, and eastward into Dacian lands, creating secondary population movements that affected demographics across much of Europe. These migrations strained resources in receiving areas, generated conflicts with existing populations, and created opportunities for ambitious leaders to establish new political arrangements. Strategic alliances formed during this period reflected the complex political calculations required for survival in the transformed Central European landscape. The Marcomanni and Quadi developed close military cooperation that allowed coordinated responses to external threats while maintaining distinct tribal identities and territorial boundaries. Their alliance created a Germanic power bloc controlling territories from Bohemia to the Carpathian Mountains, with combined military forces exceeding 100,000 warriors. Relations with the Cherushi tribe, located in northern Germania between the Weser and Elbe rivers, proved more complex due to competing territorial claims and conflicting attitudes toward Roman relations. The Cherushi maintained closer ties to Roman authorities, accepting subsidies and military assistance that enabled them to resist Suebi expansion while developing their own regional hegemony. This relationship created tensions with the Marcomannic kingdom, which viewed Cherushi cooperation with Rome as a potential threat to Germanic independence. The Chatti, occupying territories in modern Hesse and Thuringia, represented another significant factor in the evolving alliance system. Their military reputation rivaled that of the Suebi, and their strategic position controlling routes between the Rhine and Elbe made them valuable allies or dangerous enemies. Archaeological evidence from Chatti territories shows extensive fortifications and weapon production facilities that supported a warrior culture emphasizing individual combat skills and collective military discipline. Conflicts with the Chatti arose primarily from competing claims to territories along the Weser River and disagreements over tribute collection from smaller Germanic tribes. These disputes occasionally escalated into open warfare, with both sides conducting raids, seizing cattle and captives, and attempting to recruit allies from neighbouring peoples. The conflicts revealed the limitations of Germanic political organisation, as traditional mechanisms for resolving intertribal disputes proved inadequate for managing the complex territorial and political arrangements created by large-scale migrations. Sarmatian peoples along the eastern frontiers of Germanic expansion presented different challenges that required diplomatic and military responses adapted to steppe warfare traditions. The Sarmatians, primarily the Ayazyges and Roxolani tribes, controlled territories in modern Hungary and Romania, practicing nomadic pastoralism and maintaining military forces based on heavy cavalry tactics. Their mobility and fighting techniques differed significantly from Germanic infantry-based warfare, creating tactical challenges that required innovative responses. Initial contacts between Germanic and Sarmatian peoples involved both conflict and cooperation, as territorial boundaries remained fluid and economic opportunities encouraged pragmatic arrangements. Germanic tribes seeking grazing lands for their livestock negotiated seasonal agreements with Sarmatian leaders, while Sarmatian groups facing pressure from eastern nomads sometimes sought refuge in Germanic territories. These interactions facilitated cultural exchange, with Germanic peoples adopting improved horse breeding techniques and cavalry equipment, while Sarmatians learned Germanic metalworking and fortification methods. The economic foundations of the expanded Germanic territories required significant adaptations to support larger populations in new environmental conditions. Bohemian agriculture, previously dominated by Celtic farming techniques, underwent systematic reorganization under Germanic management. Archaeological evidence shows the introduction of new crop varieties, modified field systems, and improved storage facilities that increased agricultural productivity while supporting growing urban populations. Craft production expanded dramatically as Germanic settlers established workshops specializing in metalworking, pottery manufacture, textile production, and other essential industries. The concentration of skilled craftsmen in major settlements created economies of scale that improved product quality while reducing costs, enabling Germanic communities to compete effectively with Roman and Celtic producers in regional markets. Archaeological finds from production sites reveal sophisticated techniques for iron smelting, bronze casting, and precious metalworking that rivaled contemporary Mediterranean standards. Trade networks developed to connect the new Germanic territories with established commercial routes throughout Europe. Marcomannic merchants established trading posts along major rivers, negotiated agreements with Roman authorities for access to Mediterranean markets, and developed relationships with Baltic amber suppliers that provided luxury goods for elite consumption. These commercial activities generated revenues that supported military forces, funded public works projects, and enabled the accumulation of wealth necessary for political stability. The demographic transformations and territorial consolidations of the 1st century BCE created the preconditions for the most sustained and devastating conflict between Rome and the Germanic peoples in antiquity. By the middle of the 2nd century CE, the complex political arrangements that had maintained relative stability along the Danube frontier began to unravel under multiple pressures that neither Roman diplomacy nor Germanic leadership could adequately address. The resulting Marcomannic Wars, spanning from 166 to 180 CE during the reign of Marcus Aurelius, represented not merely a frontier conflict, but a civilizational collision that tested the limits of both Roman imperial resources and Germanic Confederation unity. The immediate catalyst for renewed hostilities emerged from environmental and demographic pressures that had been building throughout the early 2nd century CE. Climate data reconstructed from tree ring analysis and pollen studies indicates a significant cooling period, beginning around 150 CE, accompanied by increased precipitation and shortened growing seasons that reduced agricultural productivity across Central Europe. These climatic changes particularly affected the marginal agricultural lands that many Germanic tribes had occupied during their earlier territorial expansions, forcing communities to seek alternative sources of sustenance and creating competition for more productive territories. Archaeological evidence from settlement sites throughout Bohemia and the Carpathian Basin reveals widespread abandonment of marginal agricultural areas during this period, with populations concentrating in river valleys and areas with more reliable water sources. Storage pit complexes show decreased grain reserves, while refuse deposits indicate dietary changes that included increased consumption of wild foods and reduced livestock holdings. These material indicators suggest that Germanic communities faced genuine subsistence crises that traditional coping mechanisms could not adequately address. The situation deteriorated dramatically with the arrival of the Antonine Plague around 165 CE, a pandemic that devastated populations throughout the Roman Empire and adjacent territories. Contemporary sources describe symptoms consistent with smallpox or measles, diseases to which Germanic populations would have had limited immunity. The plague spread rapidly along trade routes and military supply lines, affecting both Roman frontier garrisons and Germanic communities with devastating mortality rates that disrupted normal social and economic functions. Roman military records indicate that frontier legions lost between 20 and 30% of their effective strength to disease during the initial plague outbreak, severely compromising their ability to maintain border security. Germanic communities suffered comparable losses, but the disease's impact proved particularly destabilizing for their political structures, which depended heavily on personal relationships between leaders and followers. The death of established chiefs and war leaders created succession crises that fragmented tribal unity and encouraged ambitious individuals to seek solutions through external conquest. The convergence of these environmental and demographic pressures created unprecedented challenges for the traditional diplomatic arrangements that had maintained peace along the Danube frontier. The Marcomannic kingdom, which had served as a crucial buffer state between Rome and other Germanic peoples, found itself unable to manage the competing demands of refugee populations, reduced agricultural productivity, and weakened military capabilities. King Balamar, who had assumed leadership of the Marcomanni around 160 CE, faced the impossible task of maintaining internal stability while managing external pressures from both Roman authorities and displaced Germanic groups seeking new territories. Balamar possessed considerable military experience and political acumen, having served in his youth as a hostage at Rome, where he observed imperial administrative methods and military organization. His understanding of Roman capabilities and limitations enabled him to develop strategies that exploited Roman weaknesses while maximizing Germanic advantages. However, the scale of the crisis facing his kingdom exceeded the capacity of traditional Germanic political institutions to provide effective solutions, forcing him to consider increasingly desperate measures. The initial phase of Germanic pressure manifested through increased raiding activity along the Danube frontier, as tribal groups sought to acquire resources necessary for survival through military action. These raids differed significantly from earlier sporadic attacks, demonstrating coordinated planning and strategic objectives that suggested central direction. Roman frontier commanders reported simultaneous attacks at multiple points along the border, indicating that Germanic leaders had developed sophisticated intelligence networks and communication systems that enabled coordinated military operations across vast distances. Archaeological evidence from Roman frontier installations shows extensive damage and hasty repairs during this period, with many auxiliary forts abandoned and their garrisons concentrated in larger, more defensible positions. Coin hoards buried throughout the frontier regions indicate that civilian populations anticipated prolonged conflict and took measures to protect their valuables from Germanic raiders. The frequency and distribution of these hoards suggests that the raiding activity affected broad areas rather than isolated locations, creating genuine fear among Roman provincial populations. The transformation of sporadic raiding into systematic invasion occurred gradually during 166 and 167 CE, as Germanic leaders recognized that Roman military responses remained limited and uncoordinated. The plague's impact on frontier defences created opportunities that ambitious Germanic commanders could not ignore, while the desperate circumstances of their own populations provided justification for increasingly aggressive actions. Intelligence gathered through trading contacts and diplomatic exchanges revealed Roman military weaknesses that encouraged Germanic leaders to attempt more ambitious operations. The Langobardi and Obi tribes initiated the first major breakthrough across the Danube frontier in late 167 CE, penetrating Roman defences in Pannonia and advancing toward the provincial capital at Carnuntum. These tribes, displaced from their traditional territories by demographic pressure and environmental degradation, brought with them not only warriors but entire populations seeking permanent settlement in Roman territory. Their invasion force included an estimated 6,000 warriors, accompanied by families, livestock, and essential supplies, indicating their intention to establish permanent settlements rather than conduct temporary raids. Roman responses to this initial invasion reveal the extent to which imperial military capabilities had been compromised by the ongoing plague and competing strategic priorities. The governor of Pannonia, Marcus Iulius Bassus, commanded only 2 depleted legions and several auxiliary units that lacked the strength to confront the Germanic invasion force directly. His attempts to negotiate with Germanic leaders proved unsuccessful as the invaders recognized Roman weakness and pressed their advantages through continued military pressure. The situation deteriorated rapidly when additional Germanic groups, encouraged by Langobardi and Obi successes, began their own invasions across different sections of the frontier. The Marcomanni, under Balamar's direct leadership, crossed the Danube in early 168 CE with a force estimated at 40,000 warriors, representing the largest Germanic military operation since Ariovistus's campaigns in Gaul. This invasion force demonstrated sophisticated organisation, with specialised units for siege warfare, cavalry operations and logistical support that indicated careful planning and preparation. Balamar's strategic objectives extended beyond simple raiding to include the establishment of permanent Germanic settlements in Roman territory and the negotiation of favourable territorial arrangements that would provide long-term solutions to his people's demographic and environmental challenges. His forces advanced systematically through Pannonia, avoiding heavily fortified positions while seizing control of agricultural areas, transportation networks, and population centres that could support sustained military operations. The Quadi, traditional allies of the Marcomanni, launched simultaneous operations in the eastern sectors of the frontier, coordinating their movements with Marcomannic forces to prevent Roman commanders from concentrating their defensive efforts. Quadi cavalry, renowned for their mobility and tactical skills, conducted deep penetration raids that disrupted Roman communications and supply lines while gathering intelligence about imperial military dispositions and capabilities. Roman attempts to contain these multiple invasions initially focused on defensive measures designed to protect major population centres and maintain control over crucial transportation networks. Marcus Aurelius, who had assumed personal command of frontier operations in 168 CE, established his headquarters at Carnuntum and began coordinating responses to Germanic pressure throughout the affected provinces. His presence provided symbolic reassurance to Roman forces and provincial populations, while enabling direct imperial control over military operations. The emperor's initial strategy emphasized the use of auxiliary forces and barbarian allies to counter Germanic invasions while preserving regular legionary strength for decisive engagements. This approach reflected both practical necessities imposed by limited manpower and strategic calculations designed to minimize Roman casualties while exploiting Germanic weaknesses. However, the scale and coordination of Germanic operations soon exceeded the capacity of auxiliary forces to provide effective resistance. The most serious crisis occurred in late 168 CE, when combined Marcomannic and Quadi forces advanced beyond the Alps and threatened Aquileia, a major commercial centre and strategic gateway to northern Italy. Contemporary sources describe widespread panic among Roman populations as news of Germanic advances reached Rome itself, creating fears that barbarian armies might march on the imperial capital as they had during the Cimbric invasions 3 centuries earlier. However, archaeological evidence and careful analysis of contemporary accounts indicate that while Germanic forces did advance to within striking distance of Aquileia, they did not actually besiege the city, instead focusing their efforts on securing control over agricultural territories and transportation routes in the surrounding regions. The Germanic advance toward Aquileia represented the culmination of a carefully planned strategic operation designed to force Roman authorities to negotiate favourable territorial arrangements rather than achieve military conquest of Roman territory. Balamar and his allied commanders recognized that their forces lacked the siege equipment and logistical capabilities necessary to capture major fortified cities, while prolonged operations deep in Roman territory would expose their armies to counterattack and supply difficulties. Roman military responses to the Germanic threat required fundamental changes in imperial strategic priorities and resource allocation. Marcus Aurelius initiated massive recruitment efforts throughout the empire, raising new legions and auxiliary units while recalling veteran forces from other frontier regions. These mobilization efforts strained imperial finances and disrupted established military arrangements, but provided the manpower necessary for sustained operations against Germanic forces. The emperor's military strategy evolved from defensive containment to systematic offensive operations designed to drive Germanic forces back across the Danube and establish conditions for lasting peace. This strategic shift required careful coordination between multiple army groups operating across vast territories, sophisticated logistical planning to support extended campaigns, and diplomatic initiatives to prevent additional Germanic tribes from joining the existing coalition. Germanic military tactics during the early phases of the conflict demonstrated significant evolution from traditional tribal warfare methods, incorporating innovations learned through contact with Roman military practices and adaptation to the specific challenges of operating in Roman territory. Balamar's forces employed coordinated infantry and cavalry operations, systematic siege techniques, and strategic deception that indicated professional military planning and execution. The Germanic coalition's command structure reflected the complex political arrangements necessary to coordinate operations among traditionally independent tribal groups. Balamar served as supreme commander for major strategic decisions, while individual tribal leaders retained tactical control over their own forces and responsibility for specific operational sectors. This arrangement preserved traditional Germanic military customs while enabling the coordination necessary for large-scale operations. Intelligence gathering and communication systems developed by Germanic forces rivaled Roman capabilities in their sophistication and effectiveness. Germanic scouts maintained surveillance of Roman military movements throughout the affected provinces, while messenger networks provided rapid communication between widely separated force elements. This intelligence capability enabled Germanic commanders to anticipate Roman responses and coordinate their own operations accordingly. The prolonged nature of the conflict required Germanic forces to develop logistical systems capable of supporting extended military operations far from their traditional territorial bases. Archaeological evidence from temporary Germanic camps shows sophisticated arrangements for food storage, equipment maintenance, and medical care that enabled sustained military effectiveness. These logistical capabilities represented significant innovations in Germanic military organisation that would influence their tactical approaches throughout the remainder of the conflict. Roman counteroffensives beginning in 169 CE demonstrated the empire's capacity to mobilise overwhelming military resources once imperial authorities recognised the full scope of the Germanic threat. Marcus Aurelius assembled forces totaling over 100,000 men, including regular legions, auxiliary units, and allied barbarian contingents, creating the largest Roman army deployed against Germanic peoples since Caesar's Gallic campaigns. The emperor's campaign strategy emphasized systematic reduction of Germanic strongholds, destruction of their logistical infrastructure, and coordination with diplomatic initiatives designed to fragment the Germanic coalition. These operations required careful planning and execution, as Germanic forces retained significant advantages in mobility and local knowledge that could be exploited against overextended Roman advances. However, the true strength of the Suebi Confederation lay not merely in their military capabilities, but in the sophisticated internal structures that had evolved over centuries to govern their vast territories and diverse populations. The hierarchical organisation of Suebi society reflected a complex balance between traditional Germanic egalitarianism and the practical necessities of governing large territorial confederations. At the apex of this structure stood the kings, whose authority derived from a combination of hereditary legitimacy, military prowess, and religious sanction that distinguished them from mere war leaders or tribal chiefs. Archaeological evidence from royal burial sites, particularly the elaborate grave complexes discovered at Musov in Moravia, reveals the material symbols of kingly authority that included gold torques, ceremonial weapons, imported Roman luxury goods, and distinctive regalia that proclaimed royal status to both subjects and foreign observers. Suebi kingship operated within carefully defined parameters that prevented the emergence of absolute monarchy while ensuring effective leadership during times of crisis. Kings possessed ultimate authority over military operations, foreign relations, and major judicial decisions, but their power was constrained by traditional laws, tribal assemblies, and the expectations of the warrior aristocracy who formed the backbone of Germanic political organisation. The king's household, typically numbering several hundred individuals, included personal warriors, administrative officials, craftsmen, and servants who managed the complex logistics of royal governance across scattered territories. The selection of kings followed established procedures that combined hereditary succession with merit-based evaluation by tribal assemblies. While royal bloodlines provided presumptive claims to leadership, candidates required formal recognition by assemblies of free warriors who evaluated their military capabilities, political judgment, and adherence to traditional customs. This system prevented incompetent rulers from assuming power while maintaining dynastic continuity that provided political stability during succession periods. Royal residences, identified through archaeological excavations at sites like Zavist and Stare Hradisko, functioned as administrative centres that coordinated governance across vast territorial holdings. These complexes featured large assembly halls capable of accommodating hundreds of participants, specialised workshops for producing royal regalia and weapons, extensive storage facilities for tribute collection and redistribution, and residential quarters for the royal household and visiting dignitaries. The architectural scale and sophistication of these installations demonstrates the organisational capabilities required to govern confederation territories effectively. The warrior aristocracy formed the second tier of Suebi social hierarchy, comprising individuals who had distinguished themselves through military service, accumulated wealth through successful raiding or trading ventures, or inherited elevated status through family connections. This aristocratic class, numbering perhaps 5 to 10% of the total population, controlled most agricultural land, maintained private military retinues, and exercised judicial authority over local disputes. Archaeological evidence from aristocratic burials reveals standardized symbols of elevated status, including elaborate weapons, imported jewelry, and distinctive burial practices that proclaimed social rank. Aristocratic households operated as miniature versions of royal establishments, maintaining armed retinues of professional warriors, skilled craftsmen, and agricultural labourers who provided the economic foundation for political power. These households typically controlled territories encompassing several villages and their associated agricultural lands, collecting tribute from dependent farmers while providing military protection and judicial services. The size and wealth of aristocratic establishments varied considerably, with the most powerful nobles commanding resources that rivaled those of minor kings. The relationship between aristocrats and their followers was governed by complex reciprocal obligations that balanced personal loyalty with material rewards. Warriors who served in aristocratic retinues received weapons, armour, horses, and shares of plunder in exchange for military service and personal loyalty that extended beyond mere contractual arrangements. These bonds, reinforced through ceremonial feasting, gift exchange, and shared military experiences, created networks of personal allegiance that provided political stability while maintaining flexibility for changing circumstances. Tribal assemblies represented the third crucial element of Suebi governance, providing forums for collective decision-making that balanced royal authority with popular participation. These assemblies, called by kings or senior aristocrats during times of crisis or for major policy decisions, brought together free adult males from throughout tribal territories to debate issues affecting the entire community. Archaeological evidence from assembly sites shows large, circular or oval enclosures capable of accommodating thousands of participants, with raised platforms for speakers and designated areas for different social groups. Assembly procedures followed ancient customs that ensured orderly debate while preventing domination by particular factions or interest groups. Kings or senior nobles presented issues for consideration, after which participants could voice opinions, propose alternatives, or raise objections according to established protocols. Decisions required consensus rather than simple majority votes, with extended debate continuing until acceptable compromises emerged or clear majorities developed. This system ensured broad community support for major decisions while preventing hasty actions that might prove disastrous. The scope of assembly authority encompassed declarations of war and peace, selection of military commanders, major judicial decisions, territorial disputes, and religious observances that affected entire tribal communities. Assemblies also served as forums for grievances against royal or aristocratic authority, providing mechanisms for addressing abuses while maintaining respect for established hierarchies. The frequency and importance of these gatherings reinforced community solidarity while providing practical training in collective governance. Religious practices permeated every aspect of Suebi's social organisation, providing ideological justification for political hierarchies while maintaining cultural unity across diverse territorial holdings. The Suebi worshipped a pantheon of Germanic deities whose characteristics reflected the military values and natural environment that shaped their society. Woden, the chief deity, served as patron of warriors and kings, providing divine sanction for military leadership while demanding tribute in the form of battlefield sacrifices and ceremonial offerings. Donar, the thunder god, commanded particular reverence among Suebi communities, with numerous sacred sites dedicated to his worship throughout Confederation territories. Archaeological excavations at these sites reveal evidence of elaborate ritual activities including weapon deposits, animal sacrifices and ceremonial feasting that reinforce community bonds while honouring divine powers. The god's association with storms, fertility and protection made him especially important for agricultural communities that depended on favourable weather conditions for successful harvests. Sacred groves formed the focal points of Suebi religious practice, serving as temples, assembly sites and repositories for tribal treasures that could not be housed in conventional structures. These groves, typically located in ancient forest clearings surrounded by massive oak trees, provided settings for seasonal festivals, initiation ceremonies, and major religious observances that brought together participants from throughout tribal territories. The trees themselves were considered sacred, with specific specimens serving as dwelling places for divine spirits that protected tribal communities. Priests known as druids among some Suebi groups maintained the sacred groves and conducted religious ceremonies that reinforced social hierarchies while providing spiritual guidance for individual and community decisions. These religious specialists, typically drawn from aristocratic families, received extensive training in traditional law, ritual procedures, and legal precedents that qualified them to serve as judges, advisors, and intermediaries between human and divine realms. Their authority derived from spiritual rather than temporal sources, enabling them to challenge even royal decisions when religious principles were at stake. The role of priests extended beyond purely religious functions to encompass legal interpretation, historical preservation, and educational responsibilities that made them essential figures in Suebi society. Priests memorized vast collections of laws, genealogies, and traditional stories that preserved cultural knowledge across generations, serving as living libraries in societies that lacked written records. Their training required decades of study and practice, creating a specialized class of intellectuals whose expertise was essential for maintaining cultural continuity. Seasonal festivals provided regular occasions for community-wide religious observances that reinforced social bonds while honoring divine powers. The most important of these celebrations occurred during the winter solstice, when communities gathered to feast, exchange gifts, and conduct ceremonies designed to ensure the return of spring and successful agricultural seasons. These festivals featured elaborate ritual combats, ceremonial drinking, and religious dramas that reenacted mythological events while providing entertainment and social interaction. Economic foundations of Suebi society rested primarily on mixed agricultural systems that combined crop cultivation with animal husbandry to provide subsistence for dense populations while generating surpluses for trade and tribute. Archaeological evidence from settlement sites throughout Suebi territories reveals sophisticated farming techniques that maximize productivity while maintaining soil fertility through crop rotation, selective breeding, and careful resource management. The typical Suebi farmstead included residential buildings, storage facilities, workshops, and animal enclosures arranged around central courtyards that facilitated efficient agricultural operations. Crop cultivation focused on hardy grains that could survive the variable climate conditions of Central European territories, with barley, oats, and rye forming the staples of Suebi agriculture. Wheat cultivation, while less common due to its greater environmental requirements, provided higher status foods for aristocratic households and religious ceremonies. Archaeological analysis of grain storage facilities reveals sophisticated preservation techniques that enable communities to maintain food reserves through multiple growing seasons, providing security against crop failures and supporting military campaigns. Animal husbandry played an equally important role in Suebi economic systems, with cattle, horses, sheep, and pigs providing meat, dairy products, leather, and transportation that supported both subsistence needs and commercial activities. Cattle served as the primary measure of wealth among Germanic peoples, with large herds indicating prosperity and social status, while providing resources for gift exchange and tribute payments. The quality of Suebi livestock, particularly their horses, earned recognition throughout Central Europe and provided valuable trade commodities. Specialized craft production developed to meet the demands of growing populations and increasingly sophisticated material culture that characterized Suebi society during its period of territorial expansion. Ironworking, the most crucial of these crafts, required skilled smiths who could produce weapons, tools, and agricultural implements that met the exacting standards demanded by warrior culture. Archaeological evidence from smithing sites reveals advanced techniques for steel production, pattern welding, and decorative metalwork that rivaled contemporary Roman craftsmanship. Pottery production, while less prestigious than metalworking, provided essential household goods while serving as a medium for artistic expression that reflected cultural values and social distinctions. Suebi potters developed distinctive decorative styles that incorporated geometric patterns, animal motifs, and symbolic designs that proclaimed tribal identity while demonstrating individual creativity. The distribution of pottery styles across Confederation territories reveals patterns of cultural exchange and political affiliation that complement other archaeological evidence. Textile production, primarily the responsibility of women, created clothing, household furnishings, and trade goods that supported both local needs and commercial exchange. Archaeological preservation of organic materials in bog deposits and other favourable environments provides evidence of sophisticated weaving techniques, dyeing processes, and decorative methods that produce textiles of exceptional quality. The social importance of textile production is reflected in the elaborate spinning and weaving equipment found in women's graves, indicating the high status accorded to skilled textile workers. Trade networks connected Suebi territories with commercial systems that extended from the Baltic Sea to the Mediterranean, facilitating exchange of local products for exotic goods that enhanced the material culture of Germanic communities. The most famous of these trade routes involved amber from Baltic coastal regions, which Suebi merchants transported southward through established river valleys to Roman and Celtic markets, where it commanded premium prices. Control over amber trade routes provided substantial revenues for tribal leaders while creating diplomatic connections with distant peoples. The significance of amber trade extended beyond mere commercial considerations to encompass political and cultural relationships that influenced Suebi foreign policy and internal development. Amber served as diplomatic gifts that established alliances, sealed treaties, and demonstrated the wealth and sophistication of Suebi leadership to foreign observers. The material's association with religious practices and magical properties made it particularly valuable for ceremonial purposes, while its beauty and rarity ensured continued demand among elite consumers throughout Europe. River transportation systems provided the infrastructure necessary for extensive trade networks, with Suebi communities controlling strategic locations along major waterways that connected different economic regions. Archaeological evidence from riverport sites reveals sophisticated facilities for loading and unloading cargo, temporary storage of trade goods, and accommodation of travelling merchants who required protection and services during their journeys. These installations generated revenues through taxation and service fees, while providing opportunities for cultural exchange. Legal traditions among the Suebi reflected the complex balance between individual rights and collective responsibilities that characterized Germanic society. Traditional law, preserved through oral tradition and administered by assemblies of free men, emphasized compensation rather than punishment for most offences, seeking to restore social harmony rather than exact retribution. The severity of penalties varied according to the social status of both victims and perpetrators, with higher compensation required for offences against aristocrats and religious figures. Conflict resolution mechanisms operated at multiple levels of society, from informal mediation by respected community members to formal judicial proceedings conducted by tribal assemblies or royal courts. Most disputes involved property rights, personal injuries, or violations of customary obligations that could be resolved through negotiated settlements involving compensation payments, public apologies, or mutual concessions. These procedures emphasize restoration of social relationships rather than punishment of wrongdoers, reflecting Germanic values that prioritize community harmony over abstract justice. Honor culture formed the ideological foundation of Suebi legal traditions, establishing codes of conduct that governed relationships between individuals and groups, while providing standards for evaluating behaviour and resolving disputes. Personal honour, based on courage in battle, loyalty to superiors, and adherence to traditional customs, determined social status and influenced legal standing in ways that transcended mere economic considerations. Violations of honour codes could result in social ostracism, loss of legal rights, or demands for satisfaction through combat or compensation. The maintenance of social cohesion across the vast territories and diverse populations of the Suebi Confederation required sophisticated mechanisms for managing internal conflicts while preserving unity against external threats. However, by the early 3rd century CE, these traditional structures faced unprecedented challenges as demographic pressures, Roman military reforms, and internal political tensions converged to fragment the once unified confederation. The emergence of the Alamanni from this fragmentation represented not merely a political reorganisation, but a fundamental transformation in Germanic identity and territorial ambitions that would reshape the western frontiers of the Roman Empire for centuries to come. The Alamanni Confederation crystallized during the tumultuous decades following the Antonine Plague and the Marcomannic Wars, drawing together displaced Suebi populations who had been scattered by Roman military campaigns and territorial disruptions. Archaeological evidence from sites along the Upper Rhine and Upper Danube reveals significant population movements during the late 2nd and early 3rd centuries CE, with established settlement patterns abandoned and new communities formed in previously marginal territories. These demographic shifts reflected both Roman pressure on traditional Suebi lands and internal competition for resources that forced weaker tribal groups to seek new territories beyond the reach of established powers. The name Alamanni itself, meaning all men in the Germanic dialects of the period, reflected the composite nature of this emerging confederation. Unlike earlier Suebi formations that developed around established tribal cores with shared ancestry and territorial traditions, the Alamanni represented a conscious alliance of diverse groups united primarily by common circumstances and shared objectives rather than ethnic homogeneity. This innovative approach to confederation building would prove remarkably successful, enabling rapid territorial expansion and military effectiveness that caught Roman authorities unprepared for the scale and coordination of Germanic pressure along the Rhine frontier. The Semnones, once among the most prestigious tribes within the broader Suebi confederation, formed the largest single component of the emerging Alamanni alliance. Their traditional territories between the Elbe and Oder rivers had been severely disrupted by Roman campaigns during the Marcomannic Wars, forcing large portions of their population to migrate westward in search of new lands. Archaeological excavations at former Semnone sites reveal evidence of systematic abandonment during the late 2nd century CE, with valuable items carefully removed and structures deliberately dismantled, suggesting organised relocation rather than hasty flight from military pressure. The Semnones brought to the Alamanni Confederation their ancient prestige as keepers of Suebi religious traditions and their expertise in military organisation that had made them formidable opponents during earlier conflicts with Rome. Their priests maintained sacred groves and ritual practices that provided ideological unity for the diverse tribal groups joining the Confederation, while their warrior traditions contributed sophisticated tactical knowledge and training methods that enhanced overall military effectiveness. The integration of Semnones' leadership into Alamanni command structures provided legitimacy and continuity that helped overcome the natural tensions arising from confederation building among previously independent peoples. Other Elbe Germanic groups contributed specialized capabilities that strengthened the Confederation's military and economic foundations. The Hermunduri, traditional controllers of trade routes between the Rhine and Elbe, brought commercial expertise and established relationships with Roman merchants that facilitated intelligence gathering and resource acquisition. Their knowledge of Roman frontier defences, gained through decades of border trade and diplomatic contact, proved invaluable for planning military operations against imperial territories. Archaeological evidence from Hermunduri settlements shows extensive stockpiling of iron weapons and tools during the early 3rd century CE, suggesting systematic preparation for large-scale military campaigns. The Naristi, Butinobantes, and other smaller tribal groups provided essential manpower and territorial knowledge that enabled rapid expansion into previously unoccupied regions. These groups, often displaced from their traditional lands by larger tribal movements or Roman military action, possessed the mobility and adaptability necessary for establishing new settlements in contested frontier zones. Their warriors, hardened by years of displacement and conflict, formed the core of Alamanni raiding forces that would terrorize Roman provinces throughout the 3rd century CE. The formation of the Alamanni Confederation coincided with a period of Roman military and political crisis that created unprecedented opportunities for Germanic expansion. The assassination of Emperor Commodus in 192 CE initiated a period of civil war and political instability that diverted Roman attention and resources from frontier defence to internal conflicts. The subsequent reign of Septimius Severus saw extensive military campaigns in Britain, Mesopotamia, and other distant theatres that stripped the Rhine frontier of experienced legions and auxiliary units, leaving border defences in the hands of local militias and depleted garrison forces. Roman military reforms during this period, while ultimately strengthening imperial capabilities, created temporary vulnerabilities that Germanic leaders quickly recognised and exploited. The expansion of auxiliary forces recruited from barbarian peoples provided the Alamanni with detailed intelligence about Roman military organisation, equipment, and tactical methods through deserters and double agents who maintained contact with their tribal origins. Archaeological evidence from Roman frontier installations shows increased fortification efforts during the early 3rd century CE, indicating that imperial authorities recognised growing Germanic pressure but lacked the resources to address it effectively. The Alemanni's first major military operations targeted the Roman limes along the Upper Rhine, where decades of peace had created a false sense of security among frontier communities. These initial attacks, beginning around 213 CE during the reign of Caracalla, demonstrated sophisticated planning and coordination that indicated central command authority rather than spontaneous tribal raiding. Archaeological excavations at attacked sites reveal evidence of systematic destruction focused on military installations and administrative centres, suggesting strategic objectives beyond mere plunder acquisition. The breakthrough into the agreed decumates region represented the culmination of decades of Alamanni pressure and the collapse of Roman frontier defences under sustained Germanic assault. This fertile territory between the Rhine and Danube rivers had been systematically colonised by Rome during the 1st and 2nd centuries CE, with veteran settlements, agricultural estates, and commercial centres creating a prosperous province that generated substantial revenues for the imperial treasury. The loss of this region to Germanic conquest represented not merely a military defeat but an economic catastrophe that weakened Roman capabilities throughout the Western Empire. Archaeological evidence from the agreed decumates reveals the systematic nature of Alamanni conquest and settlement during the mid-3 RD century CE. Roman villas and urban centres show evidence of violent destruction followed by Germanic occupation, with Roman building techniques adapted for Germanic purposes and Roman infrastructure maintained for continued use. This pattern suggests that Alamanni leaders understood the economic value of conquered territories and possessed the administrative capabilities necessary to exploit Roman developments rather than simply destroying them. The speed of Alamanni advance through the agreed decumates caught Roman authorities completely unprepared, with entire legions abandoned their positions rather than face annihilation by overwhelming Germanic forces. Contemporary sources describe panic among Roman provincial populations as news of Germanic victories spread throughout Gaul and the Rhineland, creating refugee movements that further disrupted imperial administration and military organisation. The psychological impact of these defeats extended far beyond their immediate military consequences, demonstrating Roman vulnerability and encouraging additional Germanic groups to attempt their own territorial conquests. Alamanni settlement patterns in conquered territories reflected their composite origins and the practical necessities of governing diverse populations across extensive territorial holdings. Rather than imposing uniform cultural practices, Alamanni leaders allowed constituent tribal groups to maintain their distinctive customs and social organisation while requiring military service and tribute payments to confederation authorities. Archaeological evidence from Alamanni settlements shows remarkable cultural diversity, with pottery styles, burial practices, and architectural techniques reflecting the varied origins of confederation members. The establishment of permanent agricultural communities represented a fundamental shift in Germanic economic organisation that enabled sustained territorial occupation rather than temporary military conquest. Alamanni settlers adapted Roman agricultural techniques to their own needs, maintaining villa estates and field systems while introducing Germanic livestock breeds and crop varieties that proved better suited to local environmental conditions. Archaeological analysis of pollen samples and soil deposits reveals systematic land clearance and agricultural intensification during the 3rd century CE, indicating successful adaptation to sedentary farming practices. Alamanni agricultural settlements typically featured a combination of Roman and Germanic architectural elements that reflected the practical needs of mixed populations. Excavations at sites throughout southwestern Germany reveal farmsteads that incorporated Roman stone construction techniques with Germanic timber framing methods, creating hybrid structures that provided both durability and cultural familiarity. These buildings often featured Roman-style heated floors and bath facilities alongside Germanic longhouse arrangements that accommodated extended family groups and their livestock. The integration of Roman and Germanic agricultural practices created highly productive farming systems that supported growing populations while generating surpluses for trade and military purposes. Alamanni farmers adopted Roman techniques for crop rotation, soil improvement, and livestock management while maintaining Germanic traditions of communal land ownership and seasonal labour exchange. Archaeological evidence from storage facilities shows increased grain production and improved preservation methods that enabled communities to survive poor harvests and support military campaigns during critical periods. Craft production in Alamanni territories combined Roman technical knowledge with Germanic artistic traditions to create distinctive material cultures that reflected Confederation identity. Metalworking, particularly iron production and weapon manufacture, reached high levels of sophistication as Germanic smiths learned Roman techniques while maintaining traditional decorative styles and functional designs. Archaeological finds from smithing sites reveal advanced furnace designs, improved steel production methods, and standardized weapon types that equipped Alamanni military forces with equipment comparable to Roman legionary standards. Pottery production similarly blended Roman and Germanic traditions, with wheel-thrown vessels incorporating Germanic decorative motifs and functional adaptations suited to Confederation needs. The distribution of pottery styles across Alamanni territories reveals patterns of cultural exchange and political integration that demonstrate the success of Confederation building efforts. Regional variations in ceramic traditions reflect the diverse origins of Confederation members, while shared decorative elements proclaim common political identity and cultural unity. Textile production maintained its traditional importance in Germanic society, while adapting Roman techniques and materials to create products that served both practical and symbolic functions. Archaeological preservation of organic materials in favourable environments provides evidence of sophisticated weaving techniques that produced high-quality fabrics for both local use and trade purposes. The discovery of Roman-style looms and spinning equipment in Germanic contexts indicates technology transfer that enhanced productivity while maintaining traditional social roles and cultural practices. The relationship between the Alamanni Confederation and other Germanic peoples evolved through complex processes of competition, alliance, and territorial negotiation that reflected the fluid nature of Central European politics during the 3rd century CE. The Franks, emerging as a powerful confederation along the Lower Rhine, represented both potential allies and dangerous competitors for territorial control and Roman tribute payments. Archaeological evidence from the frontier regions between Alamanni and Frankish territories shows extensive fortifications and evidence of military confrontations that indicate ongoing tensions between these Germanic powers. Diplomatic relations between the Alamanni and Frankish confederations involved complex negotiations over territorial boundaries, trade rights, and military cooperation against Roman forces. Both groups recognized the advantages of coordinated action against imperial authorities while competing for control over the most valuable conquered territories and tribute sources. Archaeological finds of diplomatic gifts and ceremonial objects at sites throughout the Rhine region indicate regular contact between Confederation leaders and systematic efforts to manage inter-Germanic relations through traditional alliance mechanisms. Military conflicts between Germanic confederations often arose from competing claims to recently conquered Roman territories or disputes over tribute collection from subject populations. These conflicts, while sometimes intense, rarely involved the total warfare that characterized Germanic-Roman confrontations, instead following traditional patterns of raiding, cattle theft, and limited engagements designed to demonstrate strength while avoiding excessive casualties. Archaeological evidence from battlefield sites reveals the use of similar weapons and tactics by different Germanic groups, indicating shared military traditions despite political competition. The complex relationship with the emerging Frankish kingdom reflected broader patterns of Germanic political development during the 3rd century CE, as successful confederations evolved toward more centralized political structures that resembled traditional kingdoms while maintaining elements of tribal organization. The Franks, under leaders like Clodio and later Childeric, developed administrative systems and territorial control mechanisms that enabled sustained governance over conquered populations, while maintaining the military effectiveness that had enabled their initial conquests. Alamanni responses to Frankish political innovations included their own experiments with centralized authority and territorial administration that adapted successful practices while preserving confederation traditions. Archaeological evidence from major Alamanni centers shows the development of administrative complexes, standardized legal procedures, and systematic tribute collection that indicate growing political sophistication. These developments enabled the Confederation to compete effectively with Frankish expansion, while maintaining internal cohesion among diverse constituent groups. Trade relationships between Germanic confederations provided opportunities for both cooperation and conflict, as control over commercial routes and access to Roman markets became increasingly important for maintaining political stability and military effectiveness. The Alamanni, with their control over territories connecting the Rhine and Danube river systems, occupied strategic positions that enabled them to influence trade flows throughout Central Europe. Archaeological evidence from trading centres shows extensive commercial activity involving amber, metalwork, agricultural products, and luxury goods that generated revenues essential for Confederation operations. The emergence of permanent Germanic settlements in former Roman territories created new patterns of cultural interaction and political organisation that would influence European development for centuries to come. Among these developments, the evolution of the Quadi kingdom in the fertile plains of modern-day Slovakia represented perhaps the most sophisticated attempt by Suebi peoples to create a stable political entity capable of managing complex relationships with both Roman imperial authorities and other Germanic confederations. The Quadi transformation from traditional tribal confederation to centralized monarchy occurred gradually during the 3rd and 4th centuries CE, driven by territorial pressures, demographic changes, and the practical necessities of governing sedentary populations in strategically crucial frontier regions. Archaeological evidence from major Quadi centres, particularly the extensive settlement complexes near modern Bratislava and Nitra, reveals systematic urban development that incorporated Roman architectural techniques with Germanic social organisation principles. These sites feature planned street layouts, centralised water management systems, specialised craft districts, and monumental buildings that served both administrative and ceremonial functions. The scale and sophistication of these installations indicates that Quadi leaders possessed the technical knowledge and organisational capabilities necessary to manage complex urban environments while maintaining the cultural traditions that legitimised their authority among Germanic populations. The Quadi royal residence at Trentin, identified through extensive excavations conducted throughout the late 20th century, demonstrates the material foundations of Germanic kingship during this transformative period. The complex featured a massive timber and stone hall capable of accommodating over 500 participants for royal assemblies and ceremonial feasts, surrounded by smaller buildings that housed the royal household, administrative officials, craft specialists, and military retainers. Storage facilities within the complex could hold grain reserves sufficient to supply several thousand people for extended periods, indicating the economic resources available to Quadi rulers and their capacity to support large populations during times of crisis. The architectural elements of Quadi royal centres reflected their complex cultural position between Germanic traditions and Roman influences. Excavated structures show Roman-style hypocaust heating systems installed beneath Germanic longhouse floor plans, Roman concrete construction techniques adapted for Germanic timber framing methods, and Roman decorative motifs incorporated into Germanic artistic traditions. These hybrid architectural styles created distinctive building forms that proclaimed Quadi identity while demonstrating their sophisticated understanding of Mediterranean construction techniques and their access to skilled craftsmen capable of implementing complex projects. The development of Quadi political institutions during the 4th century CE reflected their evolving relationship with Roman imperial authorities and their need to manage internal affairs across territories that included both Germanic settlers and indigenous populations. The kingdom's administrative structure combined traditional Germanic assemblies with appointed officials who managed specific territorial districts, collected tribute payments, and coordinated military obligations. Archaeological evidence from administrative centres shows standardised weights and measures, systematic record-keeping facilities, and evidence of regular tax collection that indicates sophisticated governmental capabilities. Quadi legal traditions evolved to accommodate the complex social arrangements that emerged from their territorial expansion and political development. Traditional Germanic law, based on compensation payments and community consensus, required modification to address disputes between different ethnic groups, conflicts over property rights in conquered territories, and criminal activities that threatened royal authority. Archaeological finds from judicial centres include elaborate scales for measuring compensation payments, ceremonial weapons used in oath-taking rituals, and standardised legal documents that demonstrate the systematic nature of Quadi legal administration. The transformation of the Quadi into Roman foederati during the late 4th century CE represented a calculated political decision that provided immediate benefits while creating long-term obligations that would fundamentally alter their relationship with the Roman Empire. The foederati arrangement, formalised during negotiations with Emperor Theodosius I around 380 CE, granted the Quadi official recognition as allied peoples within the imperial system, while requiring military service in support of Roman strategic objectives. This agreement provided the Quadi with legal protection for their territorial holdings, access to Roman markets and technical expertise, and formal diplomatic status that enhanced their prestige among other Germanic peoples. Archaeological evidence from the period immediately following the foederati agreement reveals significant changes in Quadi material culture that reflect their new political status and increased contact with Roman authorities. Excavations at major settlements show the appearance of Roman-style coins bearing Quadi royal symbols, standardised military equipment that combine Germanic and Roman design elements, and luxury goods imported from throughout the Roman Empire. These material changes indicate not merely increased trade contacts, but systematic efforts to adapt Roman practices to Germanic needs while maintaining distinct cultural identity. The military obligations imposed by foederati status required the Quadi to provide troops for Roman campaigns throughout the empire, creating opportunities for cultural exchange while generating tensions within traditional Germanic social structures. Quadi warriors served in Roman expeditions to Britain, Gaul, Italy, and the eastern provinces, gaining experience with Roman military techniques while maintaining their distinctive fighting styles and cultural practices. Archaeological finds from military camps used by Quadi forces show evidence of both Roman standardization and Germanic customization in weapons, equipment, and camp organization. The integration of quasi-military units into Roman command structures required careful negotiation of authority relationships and cultural expectations that reflected the complex nature of foederati arrangements. Quadi-commanders retained control over their own troops and responsibility for maintaining Germanic military traditions, while accepting Roman strategic direction and tactical coordination during joint operations. This arrangement enabled effective military cooperation while preserving the cultural autonomy that Germanic peoples considered essential for maintaining their identity and social cohesion. Diplomatic marriages between quasi-royal families and Roman aristocratic houses represented another crucial aspect of the foederati relationship that created personal bonds while serving broader political objectives. These marriages, typically involving quasi-princesses and Roman military commanders or provincial governors, established kinship networks that facilitated communication and cooperation, while providing both sides with valuable intelligence about their partners' intentions and capabilities. Archaeological evidence from burial sites associated with these mixed marriages shows distinctive grave goods that combine Roman and Germanic traditions, indicating successful cultural synthesis at the elite level. The most significant of these diplomatic marriages involved the quasi-princess Galla and the Roman general Theodosius, whose union in 387 CE created family connections that influenced imperial policy toward Germanic peoples for generations. Contemporary sources describe elaborate wedding ceremonies that incorporated both Roman legal procedures and Germanic ritual traditions, demonstrating the careful attention paid to cultural sensitivities during these diplomatic arrangements. The children of such unions often served as intermediaries between Roman and Germanic societies, possessing the linguistic skills and cultural knowledge necessary to navigate complex political relationships. Quadi relations with the Roman Empire during the 4th and 5th centuries CE were characterized by periods of cooperation, alternating with conflicts that reflected changing political circumstances and competing strategic priorities. The kingdom's strategic position controlling crucial Danube river crossings made it an essential ally for Roman efforts to maintain frontier security, while its military capabilities and territorial resources made it a valuable partner for campaigns against other Germanic peoples. However, these same advantages also made the Quadi potential threats to Roman interests when their objectives conflicted with imperial policies. The reign of King Gabinius during the early 5th century CE exemplified the complex challenges facing Quadi leadership, as they attempted to balance Roman obligations with Germanic traditions and territorial ambitions. Gabinius, whose name reflects the Romanization of Quadi-elite culture, maintained close relationships with Roman authorities while pursuing policies designed to strengthen Quadi independence and territorial control. Archaeological evidence from his reign shows extensive fortification projects, systematic military reorganization, and diplomatic initiatives that indicate sophisticated strategic planning and political coordination. Gabinius's military reforms adapted Roman organizational methods to Germanic warrior traditions, creating hybrid military structures that combine the discipline and coordination of Roman legions with the individual courage and tactical flexibility that characterized Germanic warfare. Archaeological finds from military training sites show evidence of systematic drill instruction, standardized equipment production, and coordinated tactical exercises that indicate professional military development. These reforms enabled Quadi forces to operate effectively alongside Roman units while maintaining their distinctive fighting characteristics and cultural identity. The economic foundations of the Quadi kingdom during this period rested on a combination of agricultural production, craft manufacturing, and commercial activities that generated revenues sufficient to support royal administration and military obligations. Archaeological evidence from agricultural settlements shows systematic land clearance, improved farming techniques, and specialized crop production that increased productivity while supporting growing populations. The introduction of Roman agricultural tools and methods, combined with Germanic livestock management practices, created highly productive farming systems that provided both subsistence and surplus production. Quadi craft production reached high levels of sophistication during the 4th and 5th centuries CE, with specialized workshops producing goods for both local consumption and export trade. Archaeological excavations at production sites reveal advanced metalworking techniques that combined Roman technical knowledge with Germanic artistic traditions to create distinctive products that commanded premium prices in regional markets. The standardization of production methods and quality control procedures indicates systematic organization and royal oversight of craft activities. The relationship between the Quadi kingdom and the emerging Hunnic Empire under Attila represented one of the most challenging diplomatic and military situations that Germanic peoples faced during the 5th century CE. The Huns' arrival in Central Europe around 370 CE created unprecedented pressures on established Germanic political arrangements, forcing leaders like the Quadi to choose between resistance and accommodation, while managing the internal tensions that these decisions created within their own societies. Archaeological evidence from this period shows significant changes in settlement patterns, defensive preparations, and material culture that reflect the impact of Hunnic pressure on Germanic communities. Initial contacts between the Quadi and Hunnic forces occurred during the 380 SCE, when Hunnic raiders began probing Germanic territories along the middle Danube frontier. These early encounters, documented through archaeological evidence of destroyed settlements and hastily constructed fortifications, reveal the extent of Hunnic military capabilities and their systematic approach to territorial conquest. The speed and coordination of Hunnic attacks caught Germanic defenders unprepared, forcing rapid adaptations in defensive strategies and military organization that would influence Germanic warfare for generations. King Gabinius's response to Hunnic pressure involved a complex combination of military preparation, diplomatic negotiation, and strategic alliance building that demonstrated sophisticated understanding of the changing political landscape in Central Europe. Archaeological evidence from fortification projects initiated during this period shows systematic defensive planning that incorporated lessons learned from early Hunnic attacks while adapting Roman siege defense techniques to Germanic needs. These fortifications featured multiple defensive lines, underground storage facilities, and communication systems that enabled coordinated resistance to sustained attacks. The diplomatic negotiations between Quadi leadership and Hunnic commanders revealed the pragmatic nature of 5th century political relationships and the willingness of both sides to seek accommodation when military solutions proved too costly or uncertain. Contemporary sources describe elaborate diplomatic ceremonies that incorporated both Germanic and Hunnic ritual traditions, demonstrating the careful attention paid to cultural sensitivities during these crucial negotiations. The agreements reached during these discussions established tributary relationships that provided the Quadi with protection from Hunnic attacks while requiring regular payments of tribute in goods, services, and military assistance. The impact of Hunnic overlordship on Quadi political structures proved both transformative and destabilizing, forcing adaptations in traditional governance methods while creating new sources of internal tension and external obligation. The requirement to provide tribute payments to Hunnic authorities necessitated increased taxation of Quadi subjects, systematic resource extraction from conquered territories, and careful management of trade relationships that could generate necessary revenues. Archaeological evidence from this period shows changes in settlement organization, craft production priorities, and agricultural intensification that reflect these new economic pressures. Hunnic demands for military assistance created additional challenges for Quadi leadership, as traditional Germanic warrior culture emphasized voluntary service and personal loyalty rather than compulsory military obligations to foreign powers. The recruitment of Quadi warriors for Hunnic campaigns required careful negotiation of cultural expectations and material incentives that could motivate participation while maintaining internal social cohesion. Archaeological finds from military camps used by mixed Hunnic Germanic forces show evidence of cultural exchange and tactical adaptation that influenced both sides' military development. The gradual dissolution of distinct quadi-identity during the later 5th and early 6th centuries CE reflected broader patterns of political fragmentation and cultural transformation that characterized the migration period throughout Central Europe. The collapse of Hunnic power following Attila's death in 453 CE created opportunities for Germanic peoples to reassert their independence, but also eliminated the external pressure that had maintained unity among diverse tribal groups within established confederations. Archaeological evidence from this period shows increasing regional variation in material culture, settlement patterns, and political organisation that indicates the breakdown of centralised authority structures. The integration of former Quadi territories and populations into other tribal confederations occurred through complex processes of negotiation, conquest, and voluntary association that reflected the fluid nature of Germanic political identity during the migration period. Some Quadi groups joined the expanding Lombard kingdom, bringing their military expertise and territorial knowledge to support Lombard expansion into Italy. Others associated themselves with emerging Bavarian tribal confederations, contributing to the ethnogenesis of new Germanic peoples that would dominate Central European politics during the early medieval period. Archaeological evidence from former Quadi territories during the 6th century CE reveals the gradual transformation of material culture and settlement organisation that accompanied these political changes. Sites that had previously shown distinctive Quadi characteristics began displaying cultural elements associated with their new political affiliations, while maintaining certain traditional practices that preserved historical continuity. This pattern of selective cultural change indicates that the dissolution of Quadi political identity did not necessarily eliminate all aspects of their cultural heritage, but rather transformed them through integration into new political and social arrangements. The legacy of Quadi political and military innovations continued to influence Central European development long after their disappearance as a distinct political entity, but the most dramatic transformation of Suebi identity occurred far from their traditional heartlands along the windswept Atlantic coast of northwestern Iberia. The great barbarian invasions of 409 CE created unprecedented opportunities for Germanic peoples to establish permanent kingdoms within former Roman territories, and among these movements, the Suebi migration into Galicia represented one of the most successful attempts to create a stable Germanic monarchy on the periphery of the crumbling Western Roman Empire. The migration itself began during the harsh winter of 407 CE, when the frozen Rhine River provided a natural bridge for massive Germanic populations fleeing Hunnic pressure in Central Europe. Archaeological evidence from abandoned settlement sites throughout modern Germany reveals systematic evacuation procedures, with valuable items carefully buried in hidden caches and temporary structures dismantled for transport, indicating organised relocation rather than panicked flight. The Suebi groups participating in this westward movement included remnants of traditional tribal confederations whose territories had been disrupted by decades of warfare and political upheaval. The Suebi forces that crossed into Gaul numbered approximately 80,000 people, including warriors, families, livestock, and essential supplies packed onto thousands of wagons that stretched for miles along Roman roads. Contemporary Roman sources describe the migrants as well organised and disciplined, maintaining military formations while protecting their civilian populations from both Roman attacks and predation by other barbarian groups. The presence of women, children, and elderly individuals among the migrants clearly indicated their intention to establish permanent settlements rather than conduct temporary raiding expeditions. The alliance between Suebi, Vandal, and Alan peoples during their passage through Gaul reflected pragmatic political calculations rather than ethnic solidarity, as each group possessed complementary military capabilities that enhanced their collective survival prospects. The Vandals provided experienced infantry forces and siege expertise, gained through decades of conflict with Roman armies, while the Alans contributed superior cavalry units and knowledge of steppe warfare tactics that proved invaluable during encounters with Roman forces. The Suebi brought their traditional strengths in forest warfare and fortification construction, along with their reputation for fierce resistance that discouraged Roman pursuit. The 3-year devastation of Gaul between 407 and 409 CE created conditions that facilitated barbarian passage while demonstrating the collapse of Roman frontier defences throughout the western provinces. Archaeological excavations at sites throughout modern France reveal extensive destruction layers from this period, with Roman villas burned, urban centres abandoned, and defensive installations systematically dismantled by barbarian forces. The scale of destruction indicates coordinated military operations rather than random violence, suggesting that barbarian leaders possessed strategic objectives beyond simple plunder acquisition. The decision to cross the Pyrenees into Hispania occurred after negotiations with Roman usurper Constantine III, who controlled much of Gaul and sought barbarian military assistance for his campaigns against legitimate imperial authorities. Archaeological evidence from mountain pass sites shows extensive earthworks and temporary fortifications that indicate systematic preparation for the crossing, with advance parties establishing supply depots and defensive positions that protected the main migration columns during their vulnerable passage through the mountain defiles. The initial barbarian settlement in Hispania followed agreements mediated by Roman authorities who sought to use barbarian military power to restore imperial control over rebellious provinces. The Suebi received territorial assignments in Galicia, the northwestern region that encompassed modern Galicia and northern Portugal, along with portions of modern Leon and Asturias. This territory, while peripheral to Roman strategic interests, possessed significant agricultural potential and mineral resources that could support substantial populations while providing defensible mountain barriers against external threats. King Hermeric emerged as the paramount leader of the Suebi during the early phases of settlement, demonstrating the political and military capabilities necessary to coordinate diverse tribal groups while establishing relationships with Roman authorities and local Hispanic populations. Archaeological evidence from early Suebi settlements shows systematic land distribution, organised construction projects, and evidence of agricultural intensification that indicates effective leadership and administrative coordination. Hermeric's ability to maintain unity among traditionally independent Suebi groups while adapting to unfamiliar environmental conditions proved crucial for the kingdom's survival during its vulnerable early years. The establishment of Braga as the Suebi capital represented a calculated decision that balanced strategic, economic, and cultural considerations essential for long-term political stability. The city's location at the intersection of major Roman roads provided access to both Atlantic ports and interior territories, while its existing urban infrastructure offered immediate administrative capabilities that could be adapted to Germanic needs. Archaeological excavations throughout the city reveal systematic renovation projects that modified Roman buildings for Germanic purposes while maintaining essential urban services like water supply and waste management. The transformation of Roman urban centres for Germanic use required innovative architectural solutions that accommodated different cultural practices while preserving functional efficiency. Suebi modifications to Roman buildings typically involved the installation of central hearths in former dining rooms, the subdivision of large spaces into smaller family quarters, and the conversion of commercial areas into craft workshops that served Germanic economic needs. These adaptations demonstrate sophisticated understanding of both Roman construction techniques and Germanic social requirements. Suebi territorial organisation in Galicia reflected their traditional confederation structure adapted to the realities of governing sedentary populations across extensive geographic regions. The kingdom was divided into several major districts, each controlled by a prominent noble family responsible for local administration, military recruitment, and tribute collection. Archaeological evidence from district centres shows standardised administrative buildings, regular defensive installations, and systematic road maintenance that indicates coordinated governance across the entire territory. The integration of Hispanic populations into Suebi political structures occurred through complex processes of negotiation, intermarriage, and cultural adaptation that created new synthetic identities combining Germanic and Roman traditions. Archaeological evidence from mixed settlements shows gradual changes in material culture, with Hispanic pottery styles incorporating Germanic decorative motifs, while Germanic metalwork adopted Roman technical innovations. These cultural exchanges facilitated political integration while preserving distinct ethnic identities that enriched the kingdom's cultural diversity. Military organisation within the Suebi kingdom combined traditional Germanic warrior bands with Roman tactical innovations and Hispanic knowledge of local terrain and defensive strategies. The royal army maintained approximately 15,000 professional warriors organised into units based on tribal origins, while territorial militias provided additional manpower for defensive operations and local security. Archaeological finds from military installations reveal standardised weapons production, systematic training facilities, and coordinated supply networks that supported effective military operations throughout the kingdom. The development of Suebi naval capabilities represented a remarkable adaptation to their new maritime environment, as Germanic peoples traditionally possessed limited experience with ocean navigation and naval warfare. Archaeological evidence from coastal settlements shows the construction of harbours, shipbuilding facilities, and navigational aids that enabled Suebi forces to project power along the Atlantic coast, while maintaining commercial relationships with Mediterranean trading networks. The acquisition of naval expertise through cooperation with local Hispanic maritime communities proved essential for defending against seaborne attacks and exploiting oceanic resources. Conflicts with the Visigothic kingdom emerged gradually as both Germanic peoples expanded their territorial control and competed for dominance over the Iberian Peninsula. The Visigoths, established in southern Gaul and eastern Hispania, possessed superior military resources and more extensive Roman administrative experience. But the Suebi advantage in their mountainous territories and alliance with local populations created a rough balance of power that prevented decisive victory by either side. Archaeological evidence from frontier regions shows extensive fortifications, evidence of regular skirmishing, and systematic defensive preparations that indicate prolonged military competition. The most significant military confrontation occurred in 456 CE, when Visigothic king Theodoric II launched a major invasion of Suebi territory in response to Suebi raids into Visigothic-controlled regions. The campaign culminated in the Battle of the Orbigo River, where Suebi forces under King Rechiar suffered a devastating defeat that temporarily reduced the kingdom to tributary status under Visigothic overlordship. Archaeological evidence from battlefield sites reveals the scale of the engagement, with mass burial pits containing hundreds of warriors and extensive deposits of broken weapons and military equipment scattered across several square kilometres. The recovery of Suebi independence under King Remismund during the 460 SCE demonstrated the resilience of Germanic political institutions and the effectiveness of mountain warfare tactics against conventional military forces. Remismund's strategy emphasised guerrilla operations, fortified strongholds, and alliance building with local Hispanic populations who resented Visigothic taxation and administrative interference. Archaeological evidence from this period shows the construction of numerous hilltop fortifications, the development of hidden supply caches, and systematic preparation for prolonged resistance campaigns. Roman attempts to reassert imperial authority in Hispania during the mid-5th century CE created additional complications for Suebi political development, as the kingdom found itself caught between competing claims to legitimate authority. The arrival of Roman forces under generals like Majorian and Anthemius forced Suebi leaders to navigate complex diplomatic relationships while maintaining their territorial independence and internal political stability. Archaeological evidence from diplomatic sites shows the construction of neutral meeting places, the exchange of elaborate gifts, and systematic efforts to manage multiple political relationships simultaneously. The conversion of the Suebi to Arian Christianity during the reign of King Remismund marked a crucial turning point in the kingdom's cultural development and its relationship with other Germanic peoples. The adoption of Arianism, mediated through contacts with Visigothic missionaries and political advisors, provided the Suebi with access to a sophisticated theological tradition, while distinguishing them from Catholic Hispanic populations and Roman authorities. Archaeological evidence from early Arian churches shows distinctive architectural features that combine Germanic timber construction with Roman masonry techniques, creating unique religious buildings that proclaimed both Christian faith and Germanic identity. The establishment of Arian ecclesiastical hierarchy within the Suebi kingdom required careful negotiation between Germanic political traditions and Christian administrative requirements. Arian bishops, typically drawn from prominent noble families, assumed responsibilities for spiritual guidance, legal interpretation, and diplomatic communication that complemented rather than competed with royal authority. Archaeological finds from episcopal centres reveal the material foundations of Christian authority, including elaborate ceremonial objects, extensive libraries, and administrative facilities that supported complex religious bureaucracies. The impact of Arian Christianity on Suebi legal traditions created new frameworks for resolving disputes and maintaining social order that incorporated Christian moral principles with Germanic customary law. The development of written legal codes, influenced by both Visigothic legal innovations and Roman jurisprudential traditions, provided systematic procedures for addressing conflicts between different ethnic groups and religious communities within the kingdom. Archaeological evidence from judicial centres shows the construction of formal courtrooms, the standardization of legal procedures, and systematic record-keeping that indicates sophisticated legal administration. Cultural transformation within Suebi society accelerated during the late 5th and early 6th centuries CE as Christian influences combined with Roman administrative practices and Hispanic cultural traditions to create distinctive synthetic identities. Archaeological evidence from this period reveals significant changes in burial practices, with traditional Germanic cremation gradually replaced by Christian inhumation, while grave goods evolved to include Christian symbols alongside traditional Germanic ornaments. These changes indicate genuine cultural transformation rather than superficial adoption of foreign practices. The development of Suebi artistic traditions during this period reflected their complex cultural position between Germanic heritage and Mediterranean influences. Archaeological finds from craft workshops reveal sophisticated metalworking techniques that combined Germanic decorative motifs with Roman technical innovations and Christian symbolic elements. The production of illuminated manuscripts, ceremonial weapons, and religious artifacts demonstrates high levels of artistic achievement that rivaled contemporary production in other Germanic kingdoms. Educational institutions within the Suebi kingdom adapted Roman pedagogical methods to Germanic needs, while incorporating Christian theological instruction that prepared young nobles for leadership roles in both secular and religious hierarchies. Archaeological evidence from educational centres shows the construction of specialised buildings for instruction, the accumulation of extensive libraries, and systematic efforts to preserve both Germanic oral traditions and Latin literary culture. These institutions played crucial roles in maintaining cultural continuity while facilitating adaptation to changing political circumstances. The relationship between the Suebi kingdom and the Catholic Church evolved gradually from initial hostility through grudging accommodation to eventual conversion that fundamentally altered the kingdom's political and cultural character. The persistence of Catholic communities within Suebi territory, particularly in urban centres with strong Roman traditions, created ongoing tensions that required careful management through diplomatic negotiation and legal accommodation. Archaeological evidence from Catholic sites shows continued religious activity throughout the Arian period, indicating tolerance for religious diversity despite official royal support for Arianism. Trade relationships between the Suebi kingdom and Mediterranean commercial networks provided essential revenues and luxury goods that supported royal authority while facilitating cultural exchange with distant regions. Archaeological evidence from trading centres reveals extensive commercial activities involving local products like metals, textiles, and agricultural goods exchanged for Mediterranean wine, oil, and manufactured items. The development of standardized weights and measures, systematic taxation procedures, and commercial law indicates sophisticated understanding of market economics and international trade. The gradual integration of Suebi and Hispanic populations created new demographic patterns and cultural syntheses that would influence regional development for centuries to come, but perhaps no transformation proved as profound as the religious revolution that swept through Suebi territories during the 6th century CE. The conversion from Arianism to Catholic Christianity represented far more than a simple change in theological doctrine. It fundamentally restructured social hierarchies, legal systems, and cultural practices while creating new forms of political legitimacy that would define the kingdom's relationship with both its subjects and neighbouring powers. The initial stages of Christianization among the various Suebi groups had occurred through diverse pathways that reflected their scattered territorial holdings and complex political circumstances. The Alamanni along the Rhine frontier encountered Christianity primarily through contact with Frankish missionaries and Roman provincial populations who had maintained Catholic traditions despite Germanic conquest. Archaeological evidence from Alamanni settlements dating to the early 5th century CE reveals the gradual appearance of Christian symbols on everyday objects, the construction of small wooden churches alongside traditional sacred groves, and changes in burial practices that indicate growing Christian influence among elite families who sought to legitimize their authority through association with the dominant religion of their subjects. The process of Alamanni Christianization proceeded unevenly across their territories, with river valley communities that maintained closer contact with Roman populations adopting Christian practices more rapidly than isolated mountain settlements that preserved traditional Germanic religious customs. Excavations at sites near modern Augsburg and Regensburg show evidence of syncretistic religious practices during the 5th and 6th centuries CE, with Christian churches constructed adjacent to traditional Germanic sacred sites, and Christian festivals celebrated alongside seasonal observances that honoured ancient Germanic deities. This gradual blending of religious traditions created distinctive regional variations in Christian practice that reflected local cultural conditions and political necessities. The Alamanni initially embraced Arian Christianity, which had been promoted by Visigothic and Ostrogothic missionaries who shared Germanic cultural backgrounds and understood the political advantages of a Christianity that distinguished Germanic peoples from Roman imperial authority. Arian theology, with its emphasis on the subordination of Christ to God the Father, appealed to Germanic concepts of hierarchical loyalty and personal relationships between leaders and followers. Archaeological finds from Arian churches in Alamanni territory reveal distinctive architectural features that incorporated Germanic timber construction techniques with Christian liturgical requirements, creating religious buildings that proclaimed both Christian faith and Germanic cultural identity. the conversion of the Alamanni to Catholic Christianity occurred gradually during the 6th and 7th centuries CE through the influence of Frankish political expansion and missionary activity that accompanied military conquest. The Frankish kings, who had converted to Catholic Christianity under Clovis I around 496 CE, viewed the promotion of Catholic orthodoxy as essential for maintaining political unity and legitimising their authority over diverse populations that included both Germanic and Roman elements. Archaeological evidence from this period shows the systematic replacement of Arian churches with Catholic institutions, the introduction of new liturgical practices, and the establishment of episcopal hierarchies that answered to Frankish rather than local authority. The transformation of Alamanni religious practices under Catholic influence required careful adaptation of Christian theology to Germanic cultural expectations, while eliminating elements that conflicted with Orthodox doctrine. Catholic missionaries, many of whom possessed Germanic backgrounds themselves, developed innovative approaches to evangelization that incorporated traditional Germanic symbols and practices into Christian contexts. The veneration of warrior saints like Saint Martin of Tours provided Germanic converts with Christian role models who embodied traditional values of courage and loyalty while demonstrating submission to divine authority. Among the Danubian Suebi groups, Christianization followed different patterns that reflected their complex relationships with Roman imperial authority and their exposure to diverse theological traditions through their strategic position along major trade routes. The Marcomanni and Quadi encountered Christianity through contact with Roman merchants, diplomatic exchanges with imperial officials, and the presence of Christian captives taken during military campaigns against Roman territories. Archaeological evidence from major Suebi centres along the Danube reveals the gradual appearance of Christian artefacts during the 4th and 5th centuries CE, including imported religious objects, Christian symbols incorporated into traditional Germanic metalwork, and small churches constructed within existing settlement complexes. The adoption of Arian Christianity by many Danubian Suebi groups occurred through their political relationships with other Germanic kingdoms that had embraced this theological tradition. The Ostrogothic kingdom in Italy and the Visigothic kingdom in Hispania both promoted Arian Christianity as a means of maintaining Germanic cultural distinctiveness while participating in the broader Christian world. Archaeological finds from Suebi territories show evidence of Arian liturgical practices, including distinctive baptismal fonts, religious manuscripts written in Gothic script, and church architecture that reflected Arian theological emphases. The most dramatic and well-documented transformation occurred within the Suebi kingdom of Galicia, where the conversion from Arianism to Catholic Christianity under King Richard around 560 CE created a model for religious transformation that influenced Christian missionary activity throughout Europe. This conversion resulted from the dedicated efforts of Saint Martin of Braga, a Pannonian monk whose sophisticated understanding of both classical learning and popular religious practices enabled him to develop highly effective methods for promoting Catholic orthodoxy among Germanic populations. Martin of Braga arrived in Galicia around 550 CE with extensive theological training acquired at monasteries throughout the Eastern Mediterranean, where he had studied Greek patristic literature, participated in theological debates over Christological controversies, and observed diverse approaches to Christian missionary work among non-Roman populations. His background provided him with intellectual tools and practical experience that proved essential for addressing the complex theological and cultural challenges posed by Suebi Arianism. Archaeological evidence from Braga during this period shows extensive construction projects that created new religious infrastructure, including cathedral complexes, monastic institutions, and educational facilities that supported systematic evangelization efforts. The saints' approach to Suebi conversion emphasized intellectual persuasion rather than political coercion, recognizing that lasting religious transformation required genuine conviction rather than mere compliance with royal decrees. Martin composed theological treatises specifically designed to address Arian arguments while demonstrating the compatibility of Catholic Christianity with Germanic cultural values. His work De Correctione Rusticorum provided detailed guidance for eliminating pagan practices while preserving cultural traditions that could be adapted to Christian purposes. Archaeological finds from religious sites throughout Galicia reveal the practical implementation of Martin's recommendations, with traditional Germanic festivals transformed into Christian celebrations and ancient sacred sites converted into Christian pilgrimage destinations. The intellectual foundations of Martin's missionary work drew upon his extensive knowledge of classical philosophy and rhetoric, which enabled him to engage with educated Arian clergy in sophisticated theological debates, while developing popular religious practices that appealed to ordinary believers. His theological writings demonstrate familiarity with the works of Augustine, Jerome, and other Latin Church Fathers, combined with knowledge of Greek theological traditions that provided comprehensive responses to Arian doctrinal positions. Archaeological evidence from scriptoriums and libraries associated with Martin's activities shows the systematic production and distribution of theological literature that supported conversion efforts throughout the kingdom. The transformation of Suebi religious practices under Martin's influence required careful attention to cultural sensitivities and traditional customs that could not be eliminated without creating social disruption. The saint developed innovative approaches to Christian education that incorporated Germanic oral traditions, traditional storytelling methods, and customary legal procedures into Christian contexts. Archaeological finds from educational institutions established during this period reveal the material foundations of these efforts, including specialized buildings for instruction, extensive collections of religious manuscripts, and evidence of systematic programs for training local clergy, who could continue evangelization work in their own communities. The conversion of King Ricard and the Suebi royal court created the political conditions necessary for systematic religious transformation throughout the kingdom, but the process required careful management of competing interests and traditional loyalties that could not be ignored without risking political instability. The king's public conversion ceremony, conducted by Martin of Braga in the cathedral at Braga around 560 CE, incorporated both Catholic liturgical requirements and Germanic ceremonial traditions that proclaimed royal authority while demonstrating submission to divine will. Contemporary accounts describe elaborate processions, the destruction of Arian religious objects, and the formal renunciation of heretical doctrines that marked the kingdom's official embrace of Catholic orthodoxy. The establishment of Catholic ecclesiastical hierarchy within the Suebi kingdom required extensive reorganization of existing religious institutions and the training of new clergy who could implement orthodox practices while maintaining effective relationships with local populations. Martin of Braga served as the first Catholic metropolitan of Braga, assuming responsibility for coordinating religious transformation throughout the kingdom while establishing new bishoprics in major population centres. Archaeological evidence from episcopal centres shows systematic construction projects that created the physical infrastructure necessary for Catholic administration, including cathedral complexes, residential quarters for clergy, and administrative facilities that managed religious and secular affairs. The integration of Catholic Christianity with Suebi legal traditions created new frameworks for social organisation and dispute resolution that combined Christian moral principles with Germanic customary law. The development of written legal codes under Catholic influence, particularly the Capitula Martini attributed to St. Martin of Braga, provided systematic procedures for addressing conflicts between different religious communities while establishing Christian standards for personal conduct and social relationships. Archaeological evidence from judicial centres reveals the construction of formal courtrooms where ecclesiastical and secular authorities collaborated in legal proceedings that reflected both Christian theology and Germanic legal traditions. The transformation of Suebi burial practices under Catholic influence demonstrates the profound impact of religious conversion on fundamental cultural traditions that had defined Germanic identity for centuries. Traditional Germanic cremation practices, which reflected beliefs about the afterlife and the relationship between the living and the dead, were gradually replaced by Christian inhumation that emphasized bodily resurrection and eternal judgment. Archaeological excavations of Suebi cemeteries reveal this transition occurring over several generations, with early Christian burials maintaining some traditional Germanic elements, while later interments conformed more closely to Catholic liturgical requirements. The evolution of grave goods within Suebi burial contexts reflects the complex process of cultural adaptation that accompanied religious transformation. Early Christian burials continued to include traditional Germanic weapons, jewelry, and personal objects that proclaimed social status and cultural identity, but these items increasingly incorporated Christian symbols and motifs that demonstrated religious conversion. Archaeological analysis of burial assemblages shows the gradual replacement of pagan religious objects with Christian artifacts, including crosses, religious medallions, and liturgical items that indicated the deceased's participation in Catholic religious life. The construction of Christian churches within Suebi territories required innovative architectural solutions that accommodated Catholic liturgical requirements while reflecting Germanic cultural preferences and construction techniques. The earliest Catholic churches in Galicia combined Roman masonry techniques with Germanic timber framing to create distinctive religious buildings that proclaimed both Christian faith and cultural identity. Archaeological excavations at church sites reveal sophisticated understanding of Christian architectural symbolism combined with practical adaptations to local environmental conditions and available building materials. The development of monastic institutions within the Suebi kingdom created new forms of religious life that combined Christian ascetic traditions with Germanic concepts of warrior brotherhood and collective loyalty. Monasteries established under Martin of Brega's influence served multiple functions as centres of learning, agricultural development, and missionary activity that extended Christian influence throughout rural areas where traditional pagan practices remained strong. Archaeological evidence from monastic sites shows systematic agricultural development, extensive libraries and scriptoriums, and evidence of craft production that supported both religious communities and surrounding populations. The impact of Christianization on Suebi artistic traditions created new forms of cultural expression that synthesized Germanic decorative motifs with Christian symbolic content. Archaeological finds from craft workshops reveal the development of distinctive artistic styles that incorporated traditional Germanic metalworking techniques with Christian iconography to produce religious objects, ceremonial weapons, and decorative items that proclaimed both cultural heritage and religious conversion. The production of illuminated manuscripts, carved stone crosses, and metalwork religious vessels demonstrates high levels of artistic achievement that rivaled contemporary production in other Christian kingdoms. The transformation of Suebi educational practices under Christian influence established new institutions and methods of learning that preserved classical knowledge while promoting Christian theology and Germanic cultural traditions. Schools established in connection with cathedral and monastic institutions provided systematic instruction in Latin literacy, Christian doctrine, and practical skills necessary for religious and secular administration. Archaeological evidence from educational centres reveals the construction of specialised buildings for instruction, extensive libraries containing both religious and secular texts, and systematic programs for training clergy and secular officials who could serve the kingdom's administrative needs. The relationship between Catholic Christianity and traditional Germanic warrior culture required careful negotiation of competing values and expectations that could not be easily reconciled through simple theological formulations. Christian emphasis on peace, forgiveness, and spiritual rather than material rewards conflicted with Germanic traditions that celebrated military prowess, personal honour, and the accumulation of wealth through successful warfare. The development of Christian warrior saints and the concept of holy war provided theological frameworks that enabled Germanic converts to maintain their martial traditions while embracing Christian faith. The conversion of the Suebi to Catholic Christianity facilitated new forms of diplomatic relationship with other Christian kingdoms, while creating potential conflicts with Germanic peoples who maintained traditional religious practices or Arian theological positions. The kingdom's Catholic identity enabled closer political cooperation with the Frankish kingdom and the Byzantine Empire, both of which viewed the promotion of Catholic orthodoxy as essential for maintaining political legitimacy and cultural unity. Archaeological evidence from diplomatic sites shows increased cultural exchange with Catholic kingdoms, including the importation of religious artifacts, architectural techniques, and artistic styles that enrich Suebi material culture. The persistence of traditional Germanic religious practices alongside Christian conversion created complex patterns of cultural synthesis that varied significantly across different regions and social groups within Suebi territories. Rural communities often maintained traditional seasonal festivals, agricultural rituals, and folk practices that were gradually incorporated into Christian contexts rather than eliminated entirely. Archaeological evidence from rural religious sites shows the continued use of traditional sacred locations for Christian worship, the adaptation of pagan festivals into Christian celebrations, and the preservation of Germanic mythological traditions through Christian legendary narratives. The economic impact of Christianization included both the costs of constructing new religious infrastructure and the benefits derived from improved relationships with Christian trading partners and political allies. However, these transformations that had strengthened Suebi cultural identity and political legitimacy during the 6th century would prove insufficient to protect their independence against the rising power of the Visigothic kingdom under King Leovigild. The conquest of the Suebi kingdom of Galicia in 585 CE marked the end of the last independent Suebi political entity, concluding nearly 7 centuries of Germanic political autonomy that had begun with Caesar's encounters along the Rhine frontier. King Leovigild's campaign against the Suebi represented the culmination of decades of Visigothic territorial expansion designed to unify the entire Iberian Peninsula under a single Germanic monarchy. The Visigothic king had spent the early years of his reign consolidating control over rebellious territories, suppressing Byzantine enclaves along the Mediterranean coast, and establishing administrative systems that could govern the diverse populations of Hispania effectively. Archaeological evidence from Visigothic administrative centres during this period reveals systematic military preparations, including the stockpiling of weapons and supplies, the construction of forward bases near Suebi territories, and the recruitment of additional troops from throughout the Visigothic kingdom. The pretext for invasion emerged from succession disputes within the Suebi kingdom following the death of King Miro in 583 CE. Miro's son Eborico assumed the throne but faced immediate challenges from rival claimants who questioned his legitimacy and sought external support for their own ambitions. The political instability created opportunities for Visigothic intervention, as Leovigild could present his military action as support for legitimate authority rather than naked territorial aggression. Contemporary sources describe complex diplomatic negotiations between various Suebi factions and Visigothic representatives, with each side attempting to secure advantages through political manipulation while preparing for potential military confrontation. The Visigothic invasion began in late 584 CE with coordinated attacks along multiple fronts that demonstrated sophisticated strategic planning and overwhelming military superiority. Leovigild's forces, numbering approximately 25,000 warriors supported by extensive logistical networks, advanced simultaneously through the major mountain passes that provided access to Suebi territory. Archaeological evidence from battlefield sites reveals the systematic nature of Visigothic operations, with evidence of coordinated cavalry charges, organised siege warfare, and disciplined infantry formations that overwhelmed Suebi defensive positions through superior numbers and tactical coordination. The siege of Braga, the Suebi capital, lasted only 3 months before the city's defences collapsed under sustained Visigothic assault. Archaeological excavations within the city reveal extensive damage from this period, including burned buildings, destroyed fortifications, and mass burial sites that indicate significant casualties among both military defenders and civilian populations. The speed of Braga's fall reflected both Visigothic military effectiveness and the internal divisions within Suebi society that prevented coordinated resistance to external invasion. King Audeca, who had assumed power during the final stages of the siege through a palace coup that eliminated his rivals, attempted to negotiate terms that would preserve Suebi autonomy under Visigothic overlordship. However, Leovigild's strategic objectives required complete territorial integration rather than tributary arrangements that might encourage future rebellion. The final surrender ceremony, conducted in Braga's cathedral in early 585 CE, formally ended Suebi political independence, while incorporating their territories directly into the Visigothic administrative system. Contemporary chronicles describe elaborate rituals that proclaimed Visigothic victory, while attempting to minimise the humiliation of defeated Suebi nobles, whose cooperation would be essential for effective governance. The integration of former Suebi territories into the Visigothic kingdom required systematic administrative reorganisation that balanced the need for central control with recognition of local customs and established social hierarchies. Leovigild appointed Visigothic governors to major administrative centres while retaining many Suebi nobles in subordinate positions that utilised their knowledge of local conditions and their influence over traditional followers. Archaeological evidence from administrative sites reveals the construction of new governmental buildings, the establishment of Visigothic legal courts, and the implementation of standardised taxation systems that integrated former Suebi lands into the broader kingdom's economic structure. The fate of the Suebi royal family exemplified the complex process of political integration that characterised Visigothic conquest policies. King Audeca and other members of the royal household were transported to Toledo, the Visigothic capital, where they received honourable treatment as defeated enemies, while being prevented from returning to their former territories where they might serve as focal points for resistance movements. Archaeological finds from royal residences in Toledo include objects of Suebi origin, suggesting that exiled nobles maintained some aspects of their cultural identity while adapting to their new circumstances within Visigothic court society. The transformation of Suebi military forces following conquest involved both the incorporation of experienced warriors into Visigothic armies and the systematic disarmament of potentially rebellious populations. Suebi warriors who demonstrated loyalty to their new rulers received opportunities to serve in Visigothic military units operating throughout the kingdom, while those suspected of continued resistance faced deportation to distant territories where they could not coordinate opposition activities. Archaeological evidence from former Suebi military installations shows systematic dismantling of fortifications, confiscation of weapons stockpiles, and conversion of military facilities to civilian purposes that eliminated the infrastructure necessary for organised rebellion. The religious implications of Visigothic conquest proved less disruptive than might have been expected, as both kingdoms had embraced Catholic Christianity and shared similar ecclesiastical structures that facilitated administrative integration. The Catholic hierarchy established under St. Martin of Braga continued to function under Visigothic oversight, with existing bishops retaining their positions while accepting ultimate authority from Toledo rather than local secular rulers. Archaeological evidence from religious sites shows continued construction and renovation projects that indicate ongoing institutional vitality despite political transformation. However, the process of cultural assimilation proceeded gradually and unevenly across different regions and social groups within former Suebi territories. Rural communities often maintained traditional practices and local identities that distinguished them from their Visigothic rulers, while urban populations adapted more rapidly to new political arrangements through intermarriage, economic cooperation, and participation in kingdom-wide administrative systems. Archaeological analysis of settlement patterns reveals the persistence of distinctively Suebi architectural styles and craft traditions well into the 7th century CE, indicating that political conquest did not immediately eliminate cultural distinctiveness. The economic integration of former Suebi territories into the Visigothic kingdom generated both opportunities and challenges that affected different segments of society in varying ways. The elimination of frontier barriers between the two kingdoms facilitated expanded trade relationships and access to broader markets, benefiting merchants and craft producers who could sell their goods throughout the enlarged kingdom. Archaeological evidence from trading centres shows increased commercial activity following conquest, with standardised weights and measures, expanded warehouse facilities, and evidence of long-distance trade relationships that connected former Suebi territories with Mediterranean commercial networks. Agricultural communities faced more complex adjustments as Visigothic land redistribution policies altered traditional ownership patterns while introducing new taxation requirements and labour obligations. Large estates controlled by Suebi nobles were often confiscated and granted to Visigothic supporters, forcing former landowners to accept reduced circumstances while their former tenants adjusted to new masters with different expectations and cultural backgrounds. Archaeological evidence from rural settlements reveals changes in agricultural practices, settlement organisation, and material culture that reflect these social and economic transformations. The gradual disappearance of distinct Suebi identity in Galicia occurred through processes of intermarriage, cultural adaptation, and generational change that transformed ethnic boundaries without eliminating all traces of Germanic heritage. Visigothic settlement policies encouraged intermarriage between Germanic populations as a means of creating unified cultural identity, while legal codes provided frameworks for resolving disputes between different ethnic groups during the transition period. Archaeological evidence from cemetery sites reveals changing burial practices that combined elements from both traditions while gradually conforming to kingdom-wide standards that emphasize political rather than ethnic identity. Linguistic transformation accompanied political integration, as Latin became the dominant language of administration and formal communication, while Germanic dialects persisted in rural areas and domestic contexts. The development of regional Romance languages in former Suebi territories incorporated Germanic vocabulary and grammatical structures that preserved linguistic evidence of their cultural heritage long after political independence had ended. Archaeological finds of inscriptions and written documents reveal the gradual transition from Germanic to Latin literacy among educated populations, while maintaining Germanic personal names and place names that continue to reflect ancestral traditions. Meanwhile, the Alamanni Suebi along the Rhine frontier faced different but equally transformative pressures from the expanding Frankish kingdom, which had emerged as the dominant power in Western Europe following its conversion to Catholic Christianity and systematic territorial expansion. The Frankish conquest of Alamanni territories occurred gradually during the 6th and 7th centuries CE through a combination of military campaigns, diplomatic pressure, and cultural assimilation that ultimately eliminated Alamanni political independence, while incorporating their populations into the emerging Carolingian state system. The process of Alamanni integration into the Frankish kingdom differed significantly from the Visigothic conquest of Galicia, reflecting the different political structures and cultural policies of the conquering powers. Frankish rulers typically maintained existing Germanic social hierarchies while requiring acknowledgement of Frankish overlordship and participation in kingdom-wide military obligations. Archaeological evidence from former Alamanni territories reveals the persistence of traditional settlement patterns, craft traditions, and social customs under Frankish rule, suggesting that political integration did not require complete cultural transformation. The establishment of Frankish administrative control over Alamanni territories involved the appointment of Frankish counts and dukes to major governmental positions, while retaining many local nobles in subordinate roles that utilized their knowledge of regional conditions and their influence over traditional followers. This system created hybrid administrative structures that combined Frankish political authority with Germanic customary practices, enabling effective governance while minimizing resistance from conquered populations. Archaeological finds from administrative centres reveal the construction of Frankish-style governmental buildings alongside the continued use of traditional Germanic assembly sites for local judicial and ceremonial functions. The military integration of Alamanni warriors into Frankish armies provided opportunities for advancement and cultural exchange, while ensuring that Germanic martial traditions continued to influence Frankish military development. Alamanni cavalry techniques, forest warfare tactics, and weapon manufacturing skills proved valuable additions to Frankish military capabilities, while service in Frankish armies exposed Alamanni warriors to broader European political developments and cultural influences. Archaeological evidence from military installations shows the gradual standardization of equipment and training methods that created unified Frankish military forces while preserving regional specializations that reflected different Germanic traditions. The Christianization of Alamanni territories under Frankish influence accelerated the cultural transformation that had begun during earlier periods of missionary activity. Frankish rulers viewed the promotion of Catholic orthodoxy as essential for maintaining political unity and legitimizing their authority over diverse populations, leading to systematic efforts to eliminate remaining pagan practices while establishing comprehensive ecclesiastical hierarchies. Archaeological evidence from religious sites reveals extensive church construction projects, the establishment of monastic institutions, and systematic programs of Christian education that created new forms of cultural identity, combining Germanic heritage with Catholic religious tradition. The economic development of former Alamanni territories under Frankish rule benefited from integration into broader European trade networks, while maintaining regional specializations that reflected local resources and traditional skills. The production of high-quality metalwork, textiles, and agricultural products continued under Frankish oversight, with improved transportation networks and standardized commercial practices facilitating expanded market access. Archaeological evidence from craft production sites shows technological innovations and increased output that indicate economic growth following political integration. The linguistic transformation of Alamanni territories proceeded gradually as Latin administrative language combined with Germanic vernacular traditions to create distinctive regional dialects that preserved elements of both linguistic traditions. The development of written Germanic languages during the Carolingian period provided new opportunities for preserving traditional cultural knowledge while adapting to Christian theological and administrative requirements. Archaeological finds of manuscripts and inscriptions reveal the complex process of linguistic evolution that maintained Germanic identity within broader European cultural frameworks. The archaeological legacy of the Suebi throughout their former territories provides crucial evidence for understanding Germanic cultural development and the complex processes of political transformation that characterized the migration period. Excavations at major Suebi centres have revealed sophisticated urban planning, advanced craft production techniques, and complex social hierarchies that demonstrate the high level of cultural achievement attained by Germanic peoples during their period of political independence. The material remains of Suebi settlements, fortifications and burial sites continue to provide new insights into Germanic society, economy and cultural practices that complement and sometimes contradict literary sources produced by Roman and later medieval authors. The distribution of distinctively Suebi artifacts across modern Germany, Switzerland, Austria, Czech Republic, Slovakia, Spain and Portugal reflects the extensive territorial reach of Suebi political influence and the complex patterns of migration and cultural exchange that characterize their historical development. Archaeological analysis of pottery styles, metalwork techniques, burial practices, and settlement patterns reveals both the unity and diversity of Suebi culture, demonstrating how shared political identity combined with regional variations that reflected local environmental conditions and cultural contacts. The linguistic legacy of the Suebi survives in place names, personal names, and vocabulary elements that were incorporated into the Romance and Germanic languages that developed in their former territories. Toponymic evidence reveals the extent of Suebi settlement patterns and provides insights into their territorial organisation, while linguistic analysis of Germanic loanwords in Romance languages illuminates the processes of cultural interaction and assimilation that occurred during and after the migration period. The preservation of Germanic legal terminology in medieval legal codes demonstrates the lasting influence of Suebi legal traditions on European jurisprudential development. The historiographical assessment of Suebi contributions to European development has evolved significantly as archaeological evidence has provided new perspectives on Germanic society and culture that complement and sometimes challenge traditional interpretations based primarily on Roman literary sources. Modern scholarship recognizes the Suebi as sophisticated political entities that developed innovative solutions to the challenges of governing large territories and diverse populations, contributing to the development of medieval European political institutions through their experiments with confederation structures, administrative systems, and legal frameworks. The Suebi contribution to European legal traditions extended beyond their immediate territorial boundaries through the influence of their customary law on medieval legal development. Germanic concepts of personal law, compensation-based justice, and assembly-based decision-making provided alternatives to Roman legal traditions that proved adaptable to medieval European conditions. Archaeological evidence from judicial sites and legal documents reveals the systematic nature of Suebi legal procedures and their influence on subsequent legal development in areas where Germanic peoples established permanent settlements. Settlement patterns established by the Suebi influenced European demographic development through their innovations in agricultural techniques, urban planning, and territorial organisation. Archaeological evidence reveals sophisticated approaches to land use, resource management, and population distribution that maximize productivity while maintaining social stability. The integration of Germanic and Roman settlement practices created hybrid systems that proved adaptable to diverse environmental conditions and provided models for medieval European development. The cultural synthesis achieved by the Suebi between Germanic traditions and Roman civilization contributed to the development of medieval European culture through their preservation and adaptation of classical knowledge. The integration of Christian theology with Germanic social structures, and their creation of new forms of artistic expression that combined elements from multiple traditions. Archaeological finds demonstrate the high level of cultural achievement attained by Suebi societies, and their role in transmitting classical culture to medieval European civilization. The decline and eventual disappearance of distinct Suebi political identity mark the end of an era in European history, but their cultural and institutional legacies continue to influence European development long after their political independence had ended. The Suebi experience of migration, conquest, adaptation, and integration provided models for understanding the complex processes of cultural transformation that characterise the transition from ancient to medieval European civilization. Their story illuminates the dynamic nature of ethnic identity, the adaptability of political institutions, and the persistence of cultural traditions across periods of dramatic political change. Through 7 centuries of political evolution, military conflict, territorial expansion, and cultural transformation, the Suebi demonstrated the capacity of Germanic peoples to create sophisticated political entities, adapt to changing circumstances, and contribute to European civilization through their innovations in governance, law, military organisation, and cultural synthesis. Their legacy survives not only in archaeological remains and linguistic evidence, but in the institutional and cultural foundations of medieval and modern European society that continue to reflect the complex heritage of Germanic and Roman interaction during the migration period. The Suebi story thus represents a crucial chapter in the broader narrative of European development, illustrating the creative potential that emerged from the collision and synthesis of different cultural traditions during one of history's most transformative periods.